morning, Winnipeg. Good morning, Manitoba. And for all those joining us live this morning on our YouTube channel and all of our social media feeds, we say good morning, universe, and welcome to the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. I'm your host, Drew Mindell, pleased to be joined by the beauties of technology by my colleagues, Dave Minuk and Ezra Ginsberg. We're with you, getting you set for tonight's Jets-Oilers matchup, a 9 o'clock puck drop. We're talking about the Jets, the week that was. We're talking about the week that is to come for the Winnipeg Jets. We're talking about Kevin Cheveldayoff's press conference, his mid-season press conference from earlier this week. It is going to be a busy Saturday morning. Going to also be joined by Sarah Orlesky of TSN, Craig Button of TSN, and our buddy Patrick Johnston of Post Media in Vancouver to talk about the Canucks ahead of the Jets' two-game set in British Columbia starting on Monday. Gentlemen, good to see you both. Dave, it's going to be a beautiful day today. I'm not sure that you need the roaring fire behind you. Might get a little hot there with all the kindling going on with that roaring blaze.
Drew, this is for all my hot takes. This is how hot they're going to be right there.
Wow, that's going to be some hot takes.
It's going to be some fired up. You're
bringing your A game tonight with all that burning hot opinion you're going to be providing this afternoon or this morning, rather.
Correct.
Ezra, nice to see you. This is my weekly reminder to you that you can now get your beard trimmed at a professional hairstylist.
Yeah, I'm aware of that, but okay. I just think you're jealous, Drew, because all the hair on my head. But Dave doesn't need a fire for all those takes that he's going to have. They're already hot enough, so you can just turn that off. But yeah, Drew, I'm not quite ready yet. I've trimmed the mustache a little bit, but as far as the hair and the beard goes, I'm just not ready yet. I'm going to keep this going, and we'll see where it goes. But for now, I'm just embracing my hairy self.
You certainly are a hairy self, so embrace it. That's good. I have no complaints about that. I appreciate your dedication to the beard and the hair and the whole look you got going on there. Anyways, good morning to you guys. Good morning to everybody in the chat room here. Nice to see so many of our friendly faces that join us on Saturday mornings, and then again, of course, for the post-game shows after each and every Winnipeg Jets game. Gentlemen, let's start the week that was for the Winnipeg Jets. There was some good. There was some bad. The Winnipeg Jets finished the week, the 4 games that they've played since we were last on air last Saturday, with a record of 2 wins and 2 losses. We go back to last Saturday, the dominant third period, the Winnipeg Jets defeating the Toronto Maple Leafs by that 5-2 margin. They come back on Monday. They lose to the Montreal Canadiens, a game that was marred by giveaways by the Winnipeg Jets. They lost that one 4-2. Bounce back on Wednesday night to defeat the Habs 4-3, holding on for dear life just to get the game into overtime, I might add. And then on Thursday night, the second half of the back-to-back, probably the sleepiest game the Jets played this season, losing to the Edmonton Oilers 2-1. The rematch goes tonight in Edmonton. I guess your thoughts, if you have a macro level, high level thought of the Winnipeg Jets so far this week.
Yeah, and macro level of this North Division, guys. I mean, aside from the fact that the Jets, Oilers, and Leafs are battling it out for first place right now, which a couple of weeks back it looked like nobody was going to catch Toronto. To me, the biggest development has been Vancouver and Calgary and the streaks that they've gone on. Right, like Vancouver's won 4 in a row. They won again last night. They've won 8 of their last 10, and then you've got Calgary, who has points in 7 of their last 10, I believe. I think they're 6-3-1 in their last 10. So that's been the biggest development almost in the North Division, is how Vancouver and Calgary are still in the conversation. And of course, Vancouver has played 3 or 4 more games than the Jets. But yeah, looking at the last 4 games, boys, I mean, you mentioned it, Drew. I mean, there have been a couple of good games, and we talked about this on the post-game show. The first game against the Habs on Monday night, we thought that the Jets deserved better, but obviously the turnovers really cost them. But that game a couple of nights ago, it was one of the weaker games of the year. And I'm not talking about just for the Jets. I'm talking about both teams. And that's what we expected, right, guys? Like, the Jets get on a plane. They get in. We don't know exactly when they got in, but they got in late. It was probably something like 1 a.m. And we knew it was going to be a little sluggish. And, they had a pretty good first period, in my opinion. But, it was obviously a game in which there wasn't a lot of offense from either team. And a couple of Connor McDavid goals was really the difference there. even though the Jets were pressing in the third period and had some good chances. But yeah, I mean, the Jets and Habs games have been close all year long. They've played 6 times now. And I don't think there's a big difference between these two teams. I think if these two teams meet in the playoffs, I think we could easily have a 7-game series. So I think tonight's game against the Oilers is going to be much more of a game where we can take something out of it. I just don't think you can take a lot out of the game on Thursday night, guys, considering they're in the middle of this 17-game and 31-day stretch. And you're in a second game of a back-to-back on the road, in which the first game was at home, and you're really tired. So I don't think much has changed over the past week. I mean, the Jets have made their push. They picked up 7 of a possible, they picked up 5 of a possible 6 points against the Toronto Maple Leafs. And they showed that they can stick with the Leafs in any type of situation. And now they're only a couple of points back with the game in hand. So, this past week was definitely mixed. But I think because of the schedule and the fact that you had that, second game of a back-to-back on the road with both teams, being pretty tired, that game almost kind of muddied the waters, and I don't think was really indicative of how the Jets have played lately.
Dave, you were there on Monday and Wednesday at the arena watching the 2 games set against the Montreal Canadiens, and of course tuning in Thursday for the second half, and last Saturday the game that of the season in terms of the most excitement after the game, and the game that had Jets fans feeling the best last Saturday after they defeated the Leafs with that dominant third period effort. What were your observations watching the Jets this week?
Well, I mean, to your point, Drew, I think everybody is feeling after that Saturday game that if you can bottle that up, then you've got yourself a blueprint for success, because, that was, the Toronto was the team to beat. Now, Toronto's, unfortunately for them, has had, I don't think our people in our chat are going to be too upset about the losing streak the Leafs have been on of late. But the fact is that Toronto hasn't been necessarily playing their best hockey. But the truth is the Jets played a very good game on Saturday until you thought to yourself, okay, are they going to be able to bottle that up? And, again, what Ezzy's talked about, they had an up and down remainder of their week. And, the Thursday game, both teams had to deal with travel. Edmonton coming back from Calgary, Winnipeg coming from Winnipeg after playing back-to-backs. So both teams were at a disadvantage. And Drew, you made the point why that game wasn't played last night versus Thursday night when, again, there's no fans in the building. So I get that you don't have to worry about paying customers, but you still want to keep people watching the game. And when the games are like that, I don't know how many people are, unless you're really interested in, you have to watch them like we do. Like, how many people are going to stick around and watch that kind of game? Because it wasn't a particularly interesting hockey game.
I think it was also unfair. Sorry, Dave, to your point. I think it was borderline unfair to the players. To make them play that game on the second half of a back-to-back when it wasn't necessary.
I agree with you. I agree.
With one tweak, that game could be on Friday.
Yeah, and like we see it in the NFL where you can make adjustments to the schedule, and it's like look, in any year where there's no repercussions, like it doesn't really make a difference to you. Like normally you have to factor in, okay, we got 15,000 or 20,000 people coming to a building. If we change the time or we change the date, that's impacting them. Well, this season, that's clearly not the case. This is a season where you can make adjustments and you can recognize, because look, these guys are professionals and we get it and they have to do things, but you have to be cognizant of the fact that we are in the most condensed schedule we're ever going to witness in the NHL. Obviously in lockouts, you see condensed schedules as well, but the reality is this is a different factor. And, you had long layoffs. And so to me, you don't really want to take a risk of injury, right? That's what you always are worried about, is that you're going to lose a player because they're not at 100%. And again, it wasn't as if you're giving Winnipeg an advantage over Edmonton, and I can see why they're not doing it. The reality is both teams had played the previous night in different cities, not in the city that they were going to. So to me, it was a mistake by the NHL, and it is what it is. It's done, and both teams dealt with it, but it was just a boring hockey game that wasn't particularly interesting. And it really was hard to glean what Ezzy said, any real interesting facts from that game.
Takeaways.
So,
there's nothing really that you can say that.
No. So to me, I would watch tonight's game with interest. And again, we've seen a Jets team that, I don't know, I think they're 9-0-1 or 9-1-0 when they've lost the previous game. So we know that's been the calling card of this Winnipeg Jets franchise throughout the course of this season, and it's an important one. You've got to Ezzy's point, Vancouver, and now look, Vancouver is charging, they're winning, and you obviously want to be winning, but Vancouver's played 4 more games than Winnipeg right now. The Leafs have played one more game. The Oilers have played 3 more games. The only team that's tied with, and I think the Flames have played 1 more as well. The only team that's the same number of games played is the Montreal Canadiens. So that's really, and you still have 3 points up on them. But every game is a 4-point game. So you've got Edmonton and Toronto both ahead of you. So this is a critical hockey game. Again, is it a must win? No, but I think it's an important one to get that feeling back, especially as you're on this long road trip out west, that you have to kind of get that good feeling back in your group that you've been able to do every game, almost after almost every loss.
Well, to your point, this is, and we'll talk more about this road trip throughout the course of the show, because this road trip is key for the Winnipeg Jets. Succeed on this road trip, and you almost bury Vancouver and Calgary, and that starts tonight, playing against the Oilers in what is going to be, I think, more reminiscent of a real hockey game between these two teams. I'd expect both teams to be very eager to get a big jump, right from the start of tonight's contest. The Jets didn't skate yesterday. They canceled practice. Obviously, I think Paul Maurice saw that this is this was a tired team that needed some extra time off, that they needed just a day away from the rink in order to get their legs back. I would be surprised if there's any lineup changes for tonight. That's not to say I agree with that, but I would be surprised to see if there are any. Usually, if there's going to be any lineup changes, barring injury that we might not be aware of, Paul Maurice likes to maybe get a practice in with that new group before putting him out into a game situation. So I'd expect it's going to be the same Jets team. I expect the Oilers, probably a similar Oilers team, because to your point, Dave, there's not a lot that you can take from Thursday's game and say this was good or this was bad and we need to shuffle our lineup now. It was just a game that almost happened in a vacuum, where both teams were struggling to generate anything because of the nature of the game and the scheduling around it.
Yeah, a few things there, Drew. I think you make a really good point about practice, because as we know, with the amount of games, like you've got some back-to-back games there, you've got a back-to-back game next weekend against Calgary, but because you have so few practice days, you really have to be smart with which days you choose. And I agree, especially with this stretch that they're in here with 4 games in 6 days, and obviously the back-to-back, against Montreal and Edmonton in there. I think that was the smart decision by Paul Maurice and the coaching staff to give the boys a day off. And I think, you're probably not going to see changes. I agree with you there. Jansen Harkins is one of the players we're talking about here, because obviously we don't expect any type of major change. And then, there's always, Ville Heinola out there. But, Paul Maurice talked about this. It was either 2 days ago or 3 days ago. Dave might know this better, but, he talked about Ville Heinola, and he said one of the main reasons why he was called up to the taxi squad was because of the long road trip, and the fact that when you're out on the road and you're in Alberta and BC, it's tougher to get a guy, to come from Winnipeg out there. So that was one of the main reasons. And it wasn't like he was saying, guys, that, Ville Heinola isn't going to play, because he hinted that, there is a chance that he might get into the lineup. So yeah, based on the game a couple nights ago, nobody should really expect a change. Doesn't mean it's not going to happen, but there's no doubt, guys, that this is a tough part of the schedule. And, not saying that the Jets can't pick up, 3 or 4 wins here, but I mean, this is a chance to separate yourself from the Canucks and from the Flames. But yeah, going back to what you asked, at the beginning of the show, Drew, you look at the macro level. I mean, the Jets are going to be a playoff team. I mean, barring a really big collapse, you're already past the midway point of the season, and the Jets are solidly in a playoff spot. Yes, Calgary and Vancouver, are 3 and 4 points back respectively. But as Dave mentioned, the games in hand are really going to come into play here. So this is an opportunity, with those 3 games against Calgary next week. We're getting a little ahead of ourselves because, of course, we've got, Edmonton and Vancouver before that. But, this is a really big stretch. And then, in April, you're going to have more home games coming up, of course, because you've been on the road basically for the entire month of March. But there's no doubt, guys, that these games are going to be crucial in terms of teams like the Jets and the Oilers, separating themselves from some of those teams that have, crawled back into it. And sometimes I think, guys, that, games in hand get overplayed a little bit because you still have to win those games. And there's that uncertainty there. So, give Vancouver and Calgary credit. We were talking about this a few weeks back. And those teams really looked out of it. Like, we were putting the nail in the coffin. Like, the nail was almost completely in the coffin. And those 2 teams have, clawed back into it. So give them a lot of credit. I still think they're in tough to make the playoffs, because I do think, the four teams that are in playoff spots right now are the four best teams. Like at the beginning of the season, I liked Vancouver better than Edmonton, but the way McDavid is playing, I can't believe, we're 15 minutes into the show here and we haven't talked more about McDavid, because I think what we're seeing is one of the best individual seasons. Like we're talking Gretzky type of stuff here.
So let's talk about McDavid. I mean, we know he got the 2 goals on Thursday night, but the Jets, I think for the most part, did a decent job of not letting him take over the game. That being said, of course he gets an opportunity and he scores 2 goals on it. That's, to some extent just an exceptional player being exceptional. But, how do the Jets sort of neutralize him tonight? Of course, the caveat being, the Oilers get last change, so the Jets can't or won't typically get their preferred matchup. So, I mean, I would like to think that if this game was in Winnipeg, Pierre-Luc Dubois would get that matchup assignment against Connor McDavid. But tonight, with the game being in Edmonton, I have to think that, Oilers head coach Dave Tippett is going to do everything in his power to put McDavid up against one of Scheifele or, we saw it on a couple different times, Nate Thompson in the Jets' fourth line, and it worked okay on Thursday night, but I'm sort of holding my breath if they'd see similar results tonight, Dave.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think, Rick and a number of commenters have said how well Neil Pionk played, and I think the key was the Jets when they faced the Oilers and were able to, relatively speaking, shut Connor McDavid down, was that it was a collective team effort, and you saw that commitment to defense. And on Connor McDavid's goals, what did we see? We saw how many errors. I mean, it's just how many errors were occurred before he scores that goal. And so it wasn't just one player who made a mistake. There were a number of players who made mistakes on Connor McDavid's opportunities. And he's too good. He's just too good a player to give that kind of that room to. And if he takes it, if you give it to him, he's going to take it and he's going to run with it and he scores goals. And to Ezzy's point, I mean, he's having one of the best individual seasons, especially given everything that's occurred. For him to be able to kind of go off the way he has and separate himself, it's pretty incredible. So, I mean, look, you're in a situation where you have to, again, collectively shut the player down. And Neil Pionk maybe seemed to have a very good, battle with Connor McDavid, a few games ago. Maybe you need to go back to that. I don't know. But I think what it comes down to is that this is a Jets team that cannot afford to just focus on, you got to focus on your game. I mean, again, Connor McDavid is going to get his opportunities and you have to try and shut him down, but you need to get this whole team going. And I think that's kind of the key. I think that's going to be the focus. That's probably what Paul Maurice is going to say. They're not skating till 12:30 Central. So The morning skate we won't be hearing from Paul Maurice till about 1:30, maybe 1:15. So that'll be on illegalcurve.com, just for those who are wanting to know what'll be happening after this broadcast.
Dave is a company man.
I am. But I just think like I said, I just think it's a function of you just can't focus on the one player. You just have to continue to roll along and get your team going, because that's kind of the most important thing.
Right. And, just on go ahead, Drew.
I was just going to say, you're listening to the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. We're live Saturday morning on our YouTube channel and all our social media feeds. So nice to see so many regulars and newcomers joining us for our weekly Winnipeg Jets discussion. A reminder, later tonight, after the game between the Oilers and the Jets, it is going to be the Illegal Curve post-game show. Be sure to hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel. Smash that subscribe button. Smash that like button. Get alerted each and every time we go live here on YouTube. This segment of the Illegal Curve Hockey Show brought to you by Dr. Les Rikus and the team at Linden Market Dental Center, official dentist of Illegal Curve Hockey. Don't be an Ezzy. Always wear a mouth guard and give yourself peace of mind protection, as well as facial, teeth, and mouth protection. To make an appointment to get your teeth to ting, visit lindenmarketdentalcenter.com. Ezzy, I interrupted you. My apologies. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's all good, brother. Just continuing to the talk about Connor McDavid, because obviously we want to get back into the Jets here, boys. But, I mean, McDavid is on pace for 98 points. 1.75 points a game is what he's averaging right now. He's up to 58 points in 33 games. So he's going to come, like, we obviously don't know if he's going to hit 100. I would probably think that, he will hit 100 just because he's so good, right? But just those numbers alone, 1.75 points a game, if he's able to hit 100 points in 56 games, like, we are going to be talking about this as one of the best individual seasons, certainly in the last, 15 years. 20 years. So he's just a pleasure to watch. And I agree with Dave. It's kind of like that LeBron James theory. I was going to say, Drew, because I know, out of the three of us, you're the biggest basketball fan, even though, Dave, M, and I like to watch the odd Raptors game, but it's like LeBron James, right? Like LeBron James, he's going to get minimum 25 points every single night. Like
he's going to get his share of points.
Exactly. And it's like Connor McDavid. Like you almost have to assume he's going to get one goal every game, or he's going to get, a goal and an assist every game because he's that good. But obviously, to Dave's point, you're not going to completely focus on him. And yeah, the pairing of Neil Pionk and Derek Forbort boys did a really good job, as they have all year, being that shutdown pair for the Jets. Like there's no question in my mind, statistically and eye test, that they've been, the Jets D pair, best D pair for the Jets. And yeah, I think it's going to be tough to get the Dubois, Connor, Ehlers line against the McDavid line. But, if you're going up, with Scheifele, Wheeler, and Paul Stastny, they're obviously going to be up to the task, even though I think the Dubois line right now is the number one line. And I think that's something that we probably should be talking about more, that even though the ice time might not indicate that, that is the Jets' top line based on skill.
I mean, we're getting way ahead of ourselves here, but I have to believe that part of the reason why the Jets were happy to acquire Pierre-Luc Dubois in the Patrick Laine trade is what he did against Austin Matthews last year in the bubble. And the Jets know that they have to go through these two, to get out into the conference finals, you have to go through your division, which oftentimes could mean facing up against a Connor McDavid and then an Austin Matthews in whatever order. I mean, who knows, of course, but that is why, Pierre-Luc Dubois, that's why I would think Dave Tippett is going to avoid McDavid against Pierre-Luc Dubois as much as possible, because I think McDavid against any of the other Jets centers, particularly Scheifele, who's not great defensively, is an appealing matchup for the Oilers head coach. And that's, where you're going to have to see sort of the quote unquote 5-man unit tonight, Dave, do what they can against Connor McDavid to, if not shut him down completely, which would obviously be ideal, but is definitely easier said than done, limit him or minimize the impact so he's not able to completely take over the game that we've seen so many times.
Yeah, and I think that's when this comes down to coaching, right? I think that Paul Maurice, he gets paid to make decisions, and the point is that you're right, you don't have last change, so as a result, you have to figure out a way to, work the chessboard in your favor, and that's part of the appeal of coaching is, clearly you're not going to want to have a situation where you just throw out your line, you just toss your line, your first line goes there, like Dave Tippett, because Dave Tippett is you can say whatever you want. He's got a head for the game, and he knows about that sort of he's very good in terms of trying to, again, he might not have all the pieces that he likes in terms of setting it up, but the fact is that's the one thing Paul Maurice has to do. He has to coach, and that's going to be, it's incumbent on him to work as best he can, given the unevenness of last change. And I think that's one of the things we're going to have to watch for tonight, and we'll talk about in the post-game show. How did the Paul Maurice do in terms of matching up against Dave Tippett? And that, look, it's a tall task, but you're a head coach of an NHL team, so it's your responsibility to do it. If you don't want the Scheifele line against the McDavid line, which you probably don't want, then you've got to figure out a way to get them off and not allow Dave Tippett to take advantage of those matchups. And even if it means changing up your game plan a little bit, you know what? So be it, because you clearly know that you'd rather have Dubois or Lowry matching up versus the Scheifele line.
Right. And as you mentioned, Dave M., that's not something that you can control. Paul Maurice and the coaching staff know that's the case. So Dave Tippett has the advantage there, just like, Paul Maurice had the advantage over Dominic Ducharme in the 2 games against the Montreal Canadiens, right? And I'm really interested to see, what this Dubois, Connor, Ehlers line does, when they haven't had 2 hours of sleep and they played the previous night, right? Because in that game against the Montreal Canadiens, and they were by far the best line. And obviously, the damage was done on the power play with Connor sniping those 2 power play goals. But at 5-on-5, I think we've seen the maturation of that line. We talk about Nikolai Ehlers a lot. And I think he has been the Jets' best forward all year long. And that's nothing against, Kyle Connor, or nothing against, Mark Scheifele, who's obviously leading the team in points. But, Ehlers drives the offense. And it was nice to see, him out there for the 3-on-3 overtime, because we were talking about that against the Toronto Maple Leafs, the game that Austin Matthews scored the game winner, and they had such a good game. And we were wondering why Dubois, Ehlers, and Connor weren't out there, right, Dave? So I'm really interested to see how that line does against, McDavid's line, even though there's a good chance that Dubois' line won't match up against McDavid's line. But I mean, it's going to be really interesting, because a couple of months ago, boys, when we were talking about this North Division, I mean, this is kind of exactly what we expected at this point in the season. And the next, 2 to 4 weeks, especially with the trade deadline in there, I think are going to be absolutely fascinating because you've got 6 teams that are still in it. And you can say whatever you want about the Canucks and Flames, but, Daryl Sutter has had an impact. They've won 4 or 5 games since Daryl Sutter took over. And
beat the Leafs last night.
They beat the Leafs last night. And obviously, the Leafs were a little bit rusty with, 4 days off between games. Or 5 days off between games. I don't know exactly what it was. It was one of the two.
Sunday. They've lost. Yeah. The Leafs are struggling, and we'll talk about that when we look at this week in the North Division a little bit later on in the program. But the Leafs. Everyone said the loss to Winnipeg. Okay, the Leafs are going to recalibrate themselves and come back after the 4 days off because they lost to Ottawa on Sunday also. And then look, they still lost to the Flames last night. They get the rematch tonight. But if you're in Toronto, I mean, I can assure you that the parade has been canceled temporarily, at least, and the panic button is getting pressed for those in Leafs Nation right now. And I don't think anybody's shedding any tears in any of the other Canadian markets over that fact.
Well, and Freddie Anderson didn't have a good night, right? It was, I think, 3 goals on the first 7 shots, and they obviously weren't all his fault. I'm trying to think of the one goal that was particularly weak. It might have been Chris Tanev's goal, I forget, but there was one goal that looked like, Freddie Anderson should have for sure had that one. So, Anderson isn't playing at the level that I think the Leafs want, but you're right, Drew. I mean, I think when you are up 9 points on the second place team, which was obviously the Jets, I think you almost start resting on your laurels a little bit, and now everybody else is caught up. So you're right. I still think the Leafs are the most talented team in this division. I don't necessarily, know if they're going to be the team that gets to the West final, which is weird to say because Toronto's obviously not in the western part of the country. Yeah, I mean, they're definitely going through that stretch. But I do think when this is all said and done, I do think, I know people in the chat maybe won't like this, but I do think that the Leafs are going to end up at the top of this division.
If I think we're pretty much in agreement that it's unlikely that we're going to see any straight lineup changes for tonight's game between the Jets and the Oilers, is it maybe time to see some line juggling at least? Maybe see some switching of players from line to line? We know that the Dubois, Connor, Ehlers line is going, but is it maybe time to see a little bit of a swap somewhere among some of those players, Dave?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, to your point, Drew, I don't anticipate Ville Heinola or Jansen Harkins going in the lineup for tonight's game, and we'll know that better in about 4 hours. But the truth is that you could see some changes. Matthew Perreault seems to be going, and maybe you get a guy like him, a little more energy guy, put him back up onto the third line, maybe move some guys around. I mean, maybe again, everyone is so fixated on line numbers. And it's funny because Pascal Vincent always kind of gets a little upset when you say, well, Pascal, your first line is this. He goes, we don't have first lines. We just have 4 lines, four lines that go out there, but it's not first, second, third, fourth. And we get so fixated on that people, if you put a guy on the third line, who's a quote, first line guy, the world is ending. But again, could Paul Stastny be your third line center? Could Adam Lowry be your fourth line center? Yeah. Here's a crazy notion, maybe play guys who are wingers as the wingers and play your centers as your centers. So, and I'm not trying to malign Nate Thompson because Nate Thompson had, as we talked about in the postgame show, his numbers were fine in the 7 minutes you played him, but you only played him for 7 minutes. And so to me, Paul Stastny's the center. He's been fine as a winger, but Paul Stastny's the center. Wouldn't he be a better third line center? And then have Adam Lowry as your fourth line center? And then have, maybe Matthew Perreault on that first line, or Andrew Kopp, who's shown that he can benefit from there, and then have Stastny, Appleton, and Perreault as your or third line, and have Kopp there, and have it doesn't really make a difference. But I'm just saying that you can differentiate these things, and I think to the point you're making and you're asking me, Drew, is then at least you have more balance throughout the whole lineup, and then you're not reliant on two lines to get the scoring and the other two to just kind of be holders. And I think when the third line was scoring and getting and putting up goals, you weren't seeing that so much, but they haven't been doing that as much of late. So to me, maybe a little bit of a line blendering wouldn't be a bad thing for the team. Now, the problem is that we never see it for a long time, right? And you want to see, like we talked about it a little while ago, you want to see that Dubois, Ehlers, Connor, see them build chemistry, get them some games together. But is it impossible to break up this lineup? Put like Wheeler on the third line. I know that's a crazy notion, but like it doesn't necessarily have to be the third line because you can play them however long you want. But I just think like you can change things up and give your team a different look with some of the different players that can add some spark to your group.
There you go. Good soliloquy from Dave Minuk there. We're pleased to welcome to the program our very good friend from TSN, Sarah Orlesky, joins us on the show. Sarah, good morning. Nice to see you. How you doing?
Oh, good morning, guys. I don't know about this whole being on camera this early in the morning. I don't know how you three do it.
Well, because I mean, we need you on the show, Sarah, to at least bring up the Q rating of the broadcast, because we have Ezzy who looks like a hairy beast. Dave Minuk with wearing a hat indoors, which is such a fashion faux pas, and the less said the better about my appearance. So you at least help us make the show look better than it currently does.
No, I contemplate going with the look, like with the hat or even a toque, and then I thought a toque would really be inappropriate given the weather and the fact that I'm indoors. But I contemplated any options that I might have: sunglasses, a mask,
It's all good. Sarah, obviously we appreciate your time. And, the last time we spoke to you on the show, Patrick Laine got traded about 15 minutes after your departure from the program. So I can only assume that we're in for another blockbuster. Maybe this morning is when we're going to see David Savard or Matthias Ekholm or any of those rumored defensemen get traded to Winnipeg. It seems that would only be fitting with your appearance here this morning, right?
If that's the case, then, anytime that you guys feel leading up to a trade deadline or anything, I'm expecting to get an invitation. And everyone, that's the way that you could promote it from now on. She's coming on. A big trade is on its way.
Exactly. The rest of your Saturday is going to be ruined as a result, because now something's going to happen. Whatever plans you had, just shove them to the wayside, because the trade is going to take place. Obviously, Sarah brought you on to talk about the Jets. We were talking about the week that was. They got the 2 wins going back to last Saturday's game in Toronto, the 2 losses to Edmonton and Montreal. Thursday's game, I mean, from our perspective, it was definitely a bit of a snoozer, to be expected, maybe, given both teams playing Wednesday and having to travel. I think tonight it's going to be almost a complete 180 from what we saw on Thursday. I'm expecting a lot more energy from both teams and frankly, a more entertaining hockey game.
Yeah, so am I. I think that it's kind of understandable that what we saw on Thursday night, not only given the fact that the two had played the night before, but just how much hockey they've been playing. So I think you're going to have some of those games sometimes. But I'm with you. I expect this to look a lot more like what we've seen in previous meetings between these two teams, which have been obviously much higher scoring. There's, speaking with Ray Ferraro heading into the first intermission on Thursday nights, because he was our intermission guest, and both of us were talking, trying to pick out things to really key on, especially when you look at that first period. There wasn't a whole lot. A joke that we could almost take every shot that had from both teams in that first period and look back at them. So I'm expecting it to be much different this time around. And I think that we'll see a more entertaining hockey game, the ones that we're more used to seeing with these clubs.
Sarah, I wanted to ask you about Pierre-Luc Dubois, Nick Ehlers, Kyle Connor. Before you came on, we were talking about that line, and it's probably going to be pretty tough for Paul Maurice and the coaching staff, to get that matchup with the Oilers having the last change. But kind of what have you seen, in the maturation? Because as far as I'm concerned, the game against the last game against the Montreal Canadiens, that line, it was, I think, the best line on the ice. So is that a line for you that you, I was calling it the first line, even though, when Mark Scheifele is centering the line, you're just used to considering that the first line. But I guess what have you seen from that line? Obviously, considering that, Dubois had the 2 weeks off, and it just seems like they're finally getting into their groove, and they're putting up the points that we expected.
Yeah, and I think that it's just, I mean, I look at that Montreal game as saying that it's one game, obviously, in which they'd combined for the 7 points. So I take it as being one game. I'm not expecting that sort of production from them all the time, but I just think that it shows that they're trending in the right direction and what the possibility is for a lot like that. It's understandable that it was going to take a while for those three to find a rhythm and get some sort of chemistry going on. And I think it's still a work in progress for them. Paul Maurice has pointed out, you've got three different styles of players there and different skill sets with it that are trying to figure out how to best complement each other. And I think Pierre-Luc Dubois is trying to figure out what exactly he needs to do to be able to get Kyle Connor and Nikolai Ehlers going. And with the lack of practice time that exists this year, and that's one of the reasons why I think that we'll see trades, or I wouldn't be surprised if we saw trades across the league, especially in the North Division, happening sooner rather than later, because with the quarantine, with lack of practice time, you want to get them integrated into new players integrated into your team as soon as possible. But I think that there's a lot of potential there. I think that the comfort level will just continue to grow, not only for those three, but just in Dubois in the system as a Winnipeg Jet. And you think everything that he's gone through over the last year, both personally and then just, I mean, with a general lack of hockey and just getting back into it, that I think that there's so much potential that exists in that top six. And I think that it gives Paul Maurice a number of different options to be able to. And I think when I came on, I heard Dave talk about how he'd like to see maybe some movement in lines at various points. And I think when you look at the depth that Winnipeg has up front, Paul Maurice has a number of options in how he wants to do it, even if it's just for a section of a period or something to change things up. And Pierre-Luc Dubois, though, with Kyle Connor and Nikolai Ehlers, I think that we got a taste of the potential of that line when they do get going.
You're listening to the Illegal Curve Hockey Show Saturday morning. We're live on our YouTube channel and all of our social media feeds. I'm your host, Drew Mandel. We're joined by Ezra Ginsburg and Dave Minuk. Our guest is TSN Jets reporter Sarah Orlesky.
Sarah, one of the things that Paul Maurice has at his disposal is a taxi squad. And, we thought this year being a condensed season that he would use that to his avail. And, previously it wasn't super taxing, no pun intended, on his team in terms of player usage. And he didn't really need to because they had some nice spreading out of the games. But now with March, the 17 games in 31 days, we know it's a more condensed schedule. And I thought it was interesting, his comments this week talking about when he was asked about fresh legs, getting a Jansen Harkins, a Ville Heinola into the lineup. He said it was more for insurance than for fresh legs. So do you think that he's going to be more inclined to use these guys, or do you think he'll wait for an injury to really occur before, he gets a Jansen Harkins or a Ville Heinola into his lineup?
I wouldn't be surprised if that's what it took. I mean, based on even just Paul Maurice's approach in previous seasons as well. Obviously, I appreciate that this is completely different than what we've had to deal with before and what we've seen, but just think that this team by and large is, and I'm not analytics aside, because I appreciate that some of the numbers that people look at don't always, trend in favor of Winnipeg, but they are getting wins, and they are doing well right now. And so I think that he is reluctant maybe to change something, because why? Like, you look at the game against Edmonton, I don't look at it, the game on Thursday night, and say, okay, well, you have to bring in a bunch of fresh legs now for Saturday's game here, because I look at it as being one-off. It's different if you're seeing a trend with it, but I think that he knows what he has. You try to get some consistency going with your lines, and inevitably, I would be shocked if we don't see some of those taxi squad players move into the lineup at some point, because I think that injuries are inevitable. Just with this schedule, with what we've seen in the past for it, you think about how many have been very fortunate this year when you look by and large at how few significant injuries they've had, because that hasn't been the case recently. You think of how many defensemen they've had to go through in recent seasons because of all of the injuries. So they've been able to keep guys in the lineup, keep them healthy enough. And I do think that, at least for the time being, I would be surprised if we saw him mix it up. He likes what he sees up front. He's spoken very highly about his ability to run that bench with that fourth line the way that it is. And nothing against Jansen Harkins, because from everything that Paul Maurice has said over the last year about him, he's a big Jansen Harkins fan. But again, to mix something up for the sake of mixing something up, I don't know if we're going to see that.
Sarah Orlesky is our guest. You're listening to the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. We're live on YouTube. We're live on all our social media platforms. Sarah, going back when the Dubois for Laine trade happened, we all thought that the options of the Jets going up the middle with Scheifele, Dubois, Stastny, Lowry, that would be sort of the most appealing use of a guy like Dubois and a guy like Stastny. We haven't seen that yet. We've seen Dubois on the wing. We've seen Stastny on the wing. Is that, in your estimation, maybe for lack of a better term, the nuclear option for Paul Maurice to use, if this team is struggling, they haven't struggled yet? Or do you think that's maybe the ace in the hole that he's waiting to use come playoff time, or come when the games matter a little bit more than they might right now, sort of in the heart of the season?
Well, I don't think it has to be one or the other. Again, it goes back to the depth that he has, the options that exist. I think that Paul Stastny, to put him down on the fourth, to put him, let's say, on the fourth line, or entering that fourth line. Well, is he more beneficial to you as a team if he's playing up in the top six right now, or playing more than 10 minutes? Yeah, with the way that he's playing, he is. I think that's a great season so far this year. And I don't think that necessarily you need to move things around. That fourth line, to me, has a role right now, and one that Paul Maurice is very comfortable with the way that they're executing it. And to be able to keep Paul up in that top six, or to be able, I don't think moving Adam Lowry down farther in the lineup either. I think, but I often hear or see people suggest to me on Twitter about how they think that, if you put Adam Lowry down as your fourth line center, think about how great that would be. Well, in theory, because he's not a fourth line center, I think that he adds so much more to this. And you look at the way that line, whoever has been with Andrew Kopp and Adam Lowry the years, the way that Paul has utilized them. I mean, so often he still uses them for marquee matchups. Last year, he often rolled them second off the bench. And so I think that keeping Stastny up there right now, although I wouldn't be surprised if we see it move around a little bit, maybe bring a little bit more speed up on that Lane Wheeler line at some point. For right now, what Paul is able to do up there and the options that it gives the Jets in terms of from face-offs, just defensive responsibilities, the way that they're able to do it. I think that it just, right now, it works, in my opinion, the way that it is. But for Maurice and the coaching staff to be able to have, again, that option, because if you manipulated those 12 forwards around, you just have endless options depending on what you need. And but we haven't seen it to the same extent this year. We know that Paul in previous seasons Maurice hasn't been shy about, the line blender. The blender out again. How many times have we seen that where people comment on it? So if he needs to adjust within the game, he can, but I think it just gives him, it gives him a number of different options, a number of different looks, depending on the type of team that they're playing, the type of matchup, whether or not he's that last change. But I think that they do like to have a little bit of consistency, and we've seen more of it with his line so far.
Sarah, I wanted to go back to the trade deadline. I wasn't on the Zoom call with Chevy, but I heard your question, and you asked Chevy about the quarantine. And obviously, that's what everybody is talking about in relation to the Canadian teams. And I think you'd agree, Chevy, downplayed it a little bit, but that's to be expected, because, we know that Chevy's only going to make a move, that makes his team better. And if it so happens that it's, 2.5 weeks before the trade deadline, as opposed to, 1 or 2 days before the trade deadline, then he's going to have to make that move. But when you look at, the next 3 weeks leading up to the trade deadline, I think everyone kind of agrees that, the Jets could be in the market for a top four defenseman or a defenseman in general. Is there a chance that we could see more moves. I think back to, a couple of years ago, and I think it was 6 or 7 moves that the Jets made, of course, with, Kevin Hayes being the big move. But do you think there's a chance that, we could see 2 or 3 moves? Because it seems to me like, everyone's fixated on, a Matthias Ekholm or a David Savard, but knowing Chevy, he's been more active in previous years at the trade deadline.
He has to read on this year. And I think that, the quarantine does have so much to do with it, because if you're looking in previous years, obviously you didn't have to worry about that, but I also had that sense that you had, because of that, you obviously had more trading partners. So if you're looking to avoid the quarantine, then you're trading within the North Division. Well, I don't know to what extent that's going to happen this year. I think that'll be fascinating to see. And I think it's interesting. Kevin did downplay the idea that he needed to get a trade going sooner, preferably rather than closer to the deadline because of that quarantine. And I think that that's the way that most general managers would approach it. Kyle Dubas came out and said that, yes, he's looking to get a trade going, which I appreciate, because, and not to say that, that you wouldn't take a trade right at April 12th, but I think it makes sense. I'm obviously no general manager, but it just, with a quarantine, why wouldn't you? Especially because I think that Pierre-Luc Dubois has been almost that cautionary tale of what can happen, right? That you have your quarantine, and then if you're at this point in the season and you were to take 2 weeks off from skating and then come back in, that chance of injury or something like that, I just think is that much more significant to get back up to speed. So it would be a concern. But I think that this will be a quiet deadline, and compared to what we've seen in the past, which is not what anyone would want to hear, certainly at TSN. Because it's poor James Duthie. Thank goodness that he's the best in the business at trying to host the panels, because I don't know how much we're going to see this year north of the border because of that. I think that, I do think that maybe if you see whether it be waiver pickups or something like that, perhaps, but I don't anticipate there being as much. Maybe I'll be wrong. Maybe I'll be on with you next, and it'll be one of the busiest days, and we can only hope because of the content that would provide us. But I think unless we see that this quarantine gets changed, I would just be surprised, especially because with so many teams, when you're playing the same team, you're playing within your division every game. Well, you look back and go, okay, well, in theory, where Vancouver is in the standings. But if Vancouver's got 6 games left against the teams in front of them, and then you look and go, okay, well, what if they got the 6 games? It's just, so do you really want to trade within your own division as well? I think that this is such a unique year, and I think it'll be so fascinating when the season is over to be able to go back and look at everything that happened this year and in all the different areas and how things played out.
Well, I don't think any one of us are going to bet against you, Sarah. Somebody in the chat called you Sarah Oracle. So I think most likely you're going to be right about the trade deadline, and it's going to be quiet.
Well, like I said, that's certainly nobody at my place, and nobody in the media wants to see that it's going to be quiet, because that makes for an incredibly long day when it is. But I would be surprised. But I have, as my husband will tell you, I've been wrong about many things. So perhaps it will be with this one as well.
Sarah, what have you thought of the baseball style schedule? It's one thing, we know that the North Division, the NHL, Big Gary Bettman's already on record as saying he doesn't really want that for next season. But what are your thoughts about keeping this sort of schedule where you would see Edmonton twice, or you'd see Montreal twice in a row, as opposed to what we've become, used to, which is you see it's a one and done, and then you move on to the next team?
Well, I like elements of it. I'd like to see it degraded. As much as I have enjoyed seeing the Canadian teams more often, and I think that for me, if there was a perfect schedule, we would be seeing Eastern teams in particular more often than just coming through town once a season. But I like the idea of it, especially because, guys, can you imagine if there are fans in the arena when they're back? If you were able to have 2 consecutive games against the Leafs in town, or something, just the atmosphere that would continue to build with it, especially with Canadian teams, or just teams that are either you have a rivalry with or just have even some marquee players. The excitement that happens in the city when Pittsburgh comes through town because of the players, or Washington, and to be able to have fans in, and the excitement. I've missed fans so much this season, and because there's no replacement for that atmosphere, just the rush that you get. For me as a broadcaster, when we're about to go live, with that arena is filled just before warm up, and just the energy, it's you can't replicate that. As much as all the arenas have done a good job of trying, you just can't. So I'd love to see a little bit of that more, and I'd love to see more Canadian matchups throughout the upcoming schedules. But mixed in, obviously, we're seeing. If you think about some of the teams that are in even just the typical Central Division right now and the way that they've been playing, I would love to be able to see those games and see Chicago or Riverton for a couple. I think it'd be a lot of fun.
It's got to be a particularly lonely experience being in the arena, especially this coming Wednesday night with that 9:30 puck drop, and you're sitting there at midnight, just watching the clock tick by.
Her and
That's
Fred.
gotta be quite
Hey, don't, she's with Fred. Fred's there at least.
Yeah, don't forget
true.
about
It's
Freddie.
true.
That's true.
Give Freddie a shout
Freddie-
out.
Yeah,
Freddie
is the best.
He is, but there's a lot of coffee consumption. It's heavy. I mean, I don't usually drink coffee at 10:30 at night, but I've been known to during some of these Western games. It is especially in that, so my desk is up right now in the Bud Lounge, and which is great for our home games, the vantage point for it, everything. But on road games, because there are so few of us in there, and even our crew is scaled down so much that I can hear Dennis and Kevin. I can hear them call the game from up in their booth from where I'm sitting. I don't actually need to have my earpieces in because it's that quiet, and it does. So it's funny because if you hear someone, sometimes there's been someone from housekeeping or maintenance that maybe is working on something, and it's eerie because you can hear it's almost like you can hear the pin drop for it, or someone shuffle stuff, and you look around, who's in this arena right now? There's only supposed to be 3 of us. What's going on? So yeah, it is. But the driving into the rink when, especially last month when it was darker out, still earlier, when you're driving, like, oh, okay, it's 7 o'clock and we still have 2 hours to go. And there's just, it makes for some long times. Love that we're back being able to do it, but it's certainly, late nights. I like to go to sleep early, guys. I often struggle on West Coast until season to be able to stay up through the end of the third period. So trying to stay up and kind of look engaged during some of it can be a bit of a challenge.
Well, you pulled it off for this interview, so we have no doubt that you'll be able to pull it off again Monday and Wednesday with the later games. There you go, Mama Bear with the coffee cup. Yeah,
I was going to say, Sarah, too, the fans will be back soon. We got the Bombers coming up, and and everyone's going to be vaccinated pretty soon, so the fans will be back. That arena won't be so eerie, but we can only imagine what it's like. But we're watching. All the viewers are with you at home, so just take solace in the fact that everybody's watching.
That's right. We're all in this together. Get your coffees ready. It's going to be late one this coming week, but it should be a great week of hockey ahead of us.
It all starts tonight with the Jets and the Oilers, the rematch, and then, of course, Monday and Wednesday in Vancouver. Sarah Orlesky will be hosting the broadcast with our friends at TSN. Sarah, appreciate it this morning. We'll let you get on with your Saturday. Thanks so much.
Always appreciate it, guys.
Take care. There she goes. Sarah
Thanks, Sarah.
Orlesky joining us here on the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. Let's stretch your legs, take a break for a couple minutes. Got to pay some bills. We'll be right back with more Jets talk. You're listening to the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. We're live on YouTube and all of our social media platforms.
Keeping Winnipeg laughing for over 30 years. Rumors, Canada's longest running comedy club, bringing you the biggest laughs from the best comedians on the planet. Jerry Seinfeld, Chris Rock, Jon Stewart, Dennis Miller, Brad Garrett, the greats, and all the up-and-comers too. When was the last time you laughed out loud? Make it a great night out with friends or book your office or birthday party. Even a fundraising event at Rumors. Get all the details and dates on upcoming shows at rumorscomedyclub.com.
Hey, Drew.
Ezzy, whoa, what a smile!
Yeah, I got my crowns done at Linden Market Dental Center, and they whitened my teeth.
I see.
They're so bright that every time I smile, they go,
We have hockey tonight. Do you have a mouth guard to protect those pearly whites?
I sure do.
Whoa, they even ting through the mouth guard.
Linden Market Dental Center covers all your dental needs, from restorative to cosmetic dentistry, and will fit you with a sports guard for that active lifestyle. 877 Waverly. See lindenmarketdental.com.
Hi, it's Drew from Illegal Curve here. Selling your home can be stressful, but it wasn't for me. Thanks to my friends at Zappia Group Realty, they made the process so easy. My home sold within 48 hours and with multiple offers. Zappia Group Realty took care of everything with their exquisite customer service and attention to detail. If you want to sell your home for more in less time, get started by talking to Frank and Mauro Zappia of Zappia Group Realty. Online at zappiagroup.com.
While you can't always count on your team winning, nor your favorite player scoring, one thing you can always count on is Bernstein's Deli. They've expanded their services because the team at Bernstein's Deli wants to accommodate your needs and keep you safe. Open Tuesday to Saturday from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. to serve you. Head to your phone, in-store or online to shop for groceries or order meals from the restaurant, like the legendary Illegal Curve sandwich. Just go to bernsteinsdeli.com.
So you're a pizza person, you married a wing person, but somehow your kids are salad people. You can't pick your fam, but you can pick your BP meal deal, starting from $18.99 for takeout or delivery at bostonpizza.com.
Welcome back to the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. Saturday morning, we're live here on YouTube and all of our social media platforms. This segment of the program brought to you by our good friends at Bernstein's Deli, official deli of Illegal Curve Hockey and home of the Illegal Curve Sandwich. Located in the Cordon Village Mall, Bernstein's Deli has been Winnipeg's deli destination for over 30 years. That's a long time by my count. For more information, find them on Facebook or at bernsteinsdeli.com. Whatever you need, Bernstein's Deli is there to help you out. Curbside, delivery, pickup in store, whatever you like. Be sure to check them out, bernsteinsdeli.com. Our Illegal Curve question of the day, we want to hear from you on this topic. Those of you in the chat room can certainly chime in on this as well. The Winnipeg Jets, gentlemen, have only 5 goals from defensemen this season, the fewest in the entire NHL. Do the Jets need more offense from their defensemen, and should this factor into Kevin Cheveldayoff's trade deadline approach? The reason I bring up that question now is because, of course, Chevy met with the media earlier this week, talk about the trade deadline. We referenced that in our conversation with Sarah moments ago. So from your perspective, is this something that should be factoring in to Kevin Cheveldayoff's plans moving forward during this trade deadline season?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, just before we get into that, thanks so much to Sarah for coming on. She's just awesome, and we love every time we have her on. Yeah, I mean, we talked about it before. I mean, we just, you increased the font there, Drew. It threw me off a little bit okay. with those comments. And for North End Rick, I'm drinking a 7-Eleven French vanilla cappuccino. He was wondering what I had in my coffee cup there, even though he wouldn't be surprised if there's a little whiskey in there. But yeah, I mean, like, you look at what's happening here, you know, with the Jets, and they're obviously, you know, at the top of the division. And I really don't think much has changed, guys, over the last few weeks. Like, I think the Jets need for a top 4 defenseman, probably even before the season started, was a need. Like, nothing against Derek Forbort. Like, I really like Derek Forbort, and we all agree that Forbort and Pionk, you know, the Duluth connection there has been a great pair for the Jets, the most consistent pair all year long. But if you have the ability to bring in Matthias Ekholm, you're going to do that. And, you know, that pushes, you know, Derek Forbort down, most likely to play with Tucker Pullman there on your third pair. So I mean, I still think that's the biggest need. Now, if you can add something else, yeah, you go ahead and you do it. Like, a player I was thinking about, who might be available is like a Luke Glendening, maybe like a guy that you could play on the fourth line. Someone like that. I don't think, the Jets are going to go after, Ricard Raquel's names out there, guys, or like a Mikael Granlund on Nashville. Like, the Jets don't have any lack of talent and skill in their top 9 forwards. And, Drew, you mentioned the 5 goals from defensemen. I mean, yeah, that's low for sure. And you'd expect, Morrissey to have a few more goals, and you'd expect, maybe, Tucker Poolman to have some more points. But, this isn't the defense from 2 years ago when you had Buff and you had Tyler Myers and you had Jacob Trouba. The X factor that Dave talks about is Ville Heinola. And that is something that I think is going to be very interesting to see what happens there. Because is Ville Heinola, guys, just going to be up with the taxi squad on this road trip and then he gets sent back down to the Moose? Because as Dave M has talked about for months, if not years, is that Ville Heinola at his age has to be playing in games, whether it's with the Moose or with the Jets. Yeah, sure. If he's up with the taxi squad and he misses the first 2 or 3 games of a road trip, fine. But ideally, you'd like to see him get into some games here. And the point I'm trying to make is Ville Heinola could be that guy that possibly plays in your top 4 and gives you more of an offensive element, right, Dave? Because he's been playing on the power play for the Moose. We know he has that puck moving ability. He's got great vision, good setup guy. So I'm not necessarily saying that the Jets won't make a move because they have an in-house solution in Ville Heinola, but they kind of do, guys, because you do have that ace in the hole here where you can bring in Ville Heinola and he makes you more dangerous from the back end in terms of offense. But I still do think Chevy is going to acquire a defenseman. Is it going to be Matthias Ekholm? Is it going to be David Savard? We don't know, but I would have no problem with either of those 2 guys.
Let me stop you right there. And Dave, I want you in on this one. You talk about Ekholm and you talk about Savard. Ekholm certainly brings the offensive upside that David Savard doesn't. Savard is, I'm going to say, more akin to a Dylan DeMello.
He's a physical shutdown defenseman.
That's right. There's no offensive upside.
He's big. I don't think a lot of people, realize how big of a boy David Savard is. He's a heavy player.
He's a heavy player. He keeps the high danger area of the ice clean, which is certainly an area that the Jets could stand to improve in, but he's certainly not going to bring you any offense from the back end. My question then for you, Dave, is does that make Ekholm more attractive to the Winnipeg Jets because of the offensive upside that he possesses that Savard doesn't? Or do you think the Jets, even though they only have those 5 goals from their defensemen this season, do you think that's still sufficient given the offense that they get from their forward group?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no question about it. I think the fact is, to answer your question, Drew, I think Ekholm is the number 1 target for a number of teams. I think there's a reason why he's the number 1 player on the TSN trade bait board, right? Because he is that player that can provide you offense. He's good defensively. So you've got the quote total package, and he's signed for $3.75 million for next year as well. So, I mean, he creates a concern or a question, I should say, for Kevin Cheveldayoff, because what do you do in terms of the expansion? But for a win now team like the Winnipeg Jets, and again, Blake Wheeler is what Blake Wheeler is, right? He's in a win now mode. He's in a win now mode for the last 5 years. Mark Scheifele, Nikolai Ehlers, Kyle Connor, these guys are in their peak. Connor Hellebuck, peak. So, look, the defensive core, and we've talked about the Jets' defensive prospects that they have with the Manitoba Moose. There's 5 of them, and they're young and they're good. Heinola is obviously kind of the lead dog, but you've got Dylan Samberg. You've got other young guys who are developing within that system, looking to come up. But I don't know that you have the luxury of time, which is what those players need. We saw it with Logan Stanley. Again, how many people asked me, is Logan Stanley a bust? And I said, no, Logan Stanley's not a bust. Defensemen take longer. He might even take longer than most defensemen. And again, I'm not going to pretend like I'm Nostradamus and I knew he was going to be able to do what he's done, because
you love using that Nostradamus line.
I do. It's usually Nostraezi, but
no. It's usually Nostradamus and Nostradamus. That's usually how it works.
That's true. But anyway, so the point is that Logan Stanley did what he did, and I just think you don't have the luxury of time with this Jets group to try and let those guys you don't want to rush at Dylan Samberg. Dylan Samberg is where Dylan Samberg needs to be. Johnny Kovacevic is where Johnny Kovacevic. Leon Gawanke is where he needs to be. So those guys need to be with the Manitoba Moose, because again, if they make a mistake, Pascal Vincent isn't saying you're benched and you're not playing for the remainder of the game. So they can afford to make an error that leads to a goal in an AHL game and not face repercussions as a result. And so where the stakes are so much higher in the NHL, you don't want to have players worrying about that. You don't want them thinking. You want it to be second nature. So to me, you don't necessarily have that luxury of time, though, to allow for those defensive prospects to get to that maturity level, because at that point, your forwards start to age out. And so that's the conundrum. So that's why I think from a Jets perspective, and look, you're going to have to pay a price. You're not getting Matthias Ekholm for a first-round pick and Sami Niku. I know people look, we're Winnipeggers and we love to get a good deal.
Bargain.
We love a bargain, but that's just not happening. You're not going to trade for Ekholm. I mean, there's too many buyers out there. It sounds like right now from what the insiders are saying, there's a lot of buyers for a Matthias Ekholm. Can you get a David Savard who is apparently extremely close with Pierre-Luc Dubois? I mean, how good would that be in terms of fit, right? I mean, you make a guy like Pierre-Luc Dubois even more comfortable in the city. You get a guy like David Savard who's going to come in and be comfortable in that setting as well. So to me, that could be a good fit. Now, again, I don't know that with the Jets' dynamic offense, you're super concerned about getting that production. You don't, to Ezzy's point, you don't have a Byfuglien, you don't have a Trouba, you don't have a Myers. These guys aren't the same players. But the fact is, you knew that. You knew that you don't have those players anymore. You have to adjust. You can't lament the fact that, we don't have those guys anymore.
But you have Ville Heinola, and I see in the chat, like, there's a lot of people that want to see, Heinola as early as tonight. And I said this, boys, on the post-game show. Like, I do think there's a really good chance. I shouldn't say really good. I think there is a decent chance, let's say that you see him on the road trip simply because you have that back-to-back situation against Calgary. And as Drew mentioned, depending on what happens here, like if the Jets lose a couple of games in a row, that changes things, right? Because maybe, against the Vancouver Canucks, which we know are a terrible defensive team. I don't know if you guys have been watching them, even though they've been winning, they're still not a very good defensive team.
The only reason they've been winning is Thatcher Demko has been absolutely unbelievable.
He's been incredible. There's no doubt. But this is a team that's, offense first. There's no doubt. And obviously defense last. So, if the Jets lose a couple games, do you see Ville Heinola go into the lineup to give them a little bit more of a puck moving element? Because obviously, Logan Stanley has done an admirable job and he's been, getting up in the play. We talked about that. He has that big shot from the point, but everybody's going to, agree that Ville Heinola is more skilled and adds more of an offensive element, right, Dave?
Mm-hmm.
But regardless of that, I do think the trade deadline and what the Jets do and Ville Heinola are mutually exclusive. I think, there's a lot of people that think, maybe the Jets should give Ville Heinola like a 4 or 5 game audition and that might change what Chevy does. I don't think that's the case. And you guys might disagree, but I think that, Chevy is going to make his move, and it's cliche, but he's going to make a move if it makes his defense better. And Matthias Ekholm makes the defense better. David Savard or, another guy that's out there, boys, on the trade bait board is Alex Goligoski. Like, that would be an upgrade over what the Jets currently have. But I still think Ville Heinola can get into some games and be a part of this team, even if the Jets do bring in a defenseman. So I just wanted to get that in there. It's tough to predict what will happen. We mentioned this during the first hour of the show. The main reason why Ville Heinola was called up to the taxi squad was because of travel and the fact that it's harder, as Dave knows, to get a defenseman, out on the road. So that's the main reason. It wasn't necessarily to get him into some NHL games, but we'll see what happens here. There's 6 more games on this road trip, including 3 against Calgary with a back-to-back. And, Ville might get into a game here.
Well, to your point there, Ezzy, Heinola is likely there for insurance for injury, because we know that it would be, the only other defenseman that the Jets had on the taxi squad prior to calling him back up were Sami Niku and Nelson Noje. And those are 2 guys that, Paul Maurice.
Niku's technically on the roster.
Pardon me. That's what I meant.
He's not. I know, but I'm saying, technically.
Right, technically. But, and that Paul Maurice doesn't want to have to use those guys. I think that's clear at this point in time, that should there be an injury, Maurice seems to be leaning towards using one of the guys that are down with the Moose rather than a Niku or who has played intermittently all year, or Noje, who's on the taxi squad and hasn't played at all this season. And I'd be shocked if you ever see him in the Jets lineup at this point in time.
Yeah, he's not going to Noje next. He would go either to Niku or Heinola, I would imagine. I mean, that to me is an interesting one. I think it depends on who goes down, obviously, but I it's hard to say which he would prefer to use, obviously.
So let me ask you, Dave. I mean, obviously, we all listened to Kevin Cheveldayoff, and we all listened to his press conference on Monday, sort of the halfway mark of the season, talking about what the Jets have been so far this year. And I thought, Chevy is a guy who certainly keeps his cards close to his vest and doesn't say more than is necessary. I thought he was a little more open than usual this, on Monday when he spoke. What was your takeaway from Cheveldayoff's comments, particularly, as it related to the expansion draft and the trade deadline and things of that nature, Dave?
Well, I mean, I thought he was a little less guarded. I think that to your point, I think that was one of the things that you kind of had to take away from it, is that Kevin Cheveldayoff is a master of saying a lot and sometimes saying nothing and using a lot of words. And you're thinking to yourself, what did I just listen to exactly? Because he didn't really tell you anything he just said a lot, but he didn't tell you anything.
That's similar to us usually, yeah,
oftentimes. That's true. We circle around a little bit, but that's why we are fast friends with Kevin Cheveldayoff. I'm joking, of course, but I think it's a function of, again, I think he's a guy who's aware of the situation. He's not ignorant of the fact of what his team needs, and he's not gonna sell his team through the media to tell, oh well, I need a better defenseman because our defense stinks. He's not going to say that. I mean, he may be thinking it, but he's never going to say it. So I thought he was a little more candid than we've come to expect. I thought his answers were a little more forthright. And again, like I said, it wasn't insightful in the sense that there wasn't anything groundbreaking. I mean, people asked about Brian Little, and because there were some rumors about Brian Little, and all Kevin Cheveldayoff said was there was no update. He's still in Ontario right now. But other than that, like I said, I just got the impression of a guy who isn't afraid to make a move if he has to. I mean, and I think he's aware of the limitations of the current situation. I think he knows that it's not ideal to make a trade at the trade deadline. I mean, we talked about that when James Duthie, so long ago. We said it's probably, from a Canadian perspective, unless things change from the federal government's viewpoint and they make changes to the rules, the Canadian teams, and we heard it from Kyle Dubas. I mean, Kyle Dubas was even more direct than Kevin Cheveldayoff. He said, yes, I want to make a trade now. I don't want to wait a month. So I think that's one of the things that you're seeing from these guys. And you must, again, these guys are kicking tires all the time. So it's not as if, and we saw Larry Simmons, and I don't remember who the other Jets scout was that was in Columbus, obviously watching David Savard. And the reality is these guys would have watched Savard anyways when they were scouting Dubois. So it's not as if somehow it's a new thing. I mean, the reality is when you send a scout to a team, you don't say you're only scouting one player. You're obviously keying in on one, but you're keeping your eyes on a few. So when you're sending the assistant general manager to Columbus to watch a game, well, maybe there's a reason for that. And so I suspect that to Ezzy's point, that you're going to see a Kevin Cheveldayoff who's going to make a move. If the move is there to be made, I would anticipate them making a move for a defenseman. I don't think that they're going to make a forward selection, because to Ezzy's point, they've got those options on the farm. You've got Christian Vesalainen. You've got David Gustafsson. I watch those guys. Gustafsson could play in the NHL. He's a phenomenal, for a 20-year-old guy. And there's still look, I don't think it's a bad thing that he's doing what he's doing in the AHL, but I think if you need him, you could get him to play on that fourth line, 7 minutes. He would never look bad in that situation.
Yeah, if the Jets are going to be acquiring, just wanted to say quickly, Drew, if the Jets do acquire a forward, it's most likely going to be for depth purposes. And I realize that, that's not sexy for fans to hear, but the Jets don't have a need. They have a top 5 offense in the league. So that's not what they need. They need a defenseman. They need maybe a little bit of depth. We know that, when it comes to playoff time and, you have some players that you can plug into the lineup with injuries, that's always a good thing. So I would probably, if I had to guess, I would say that, Chevy makes, 2 or 3 moves tops leading up to the trade deadline. And just wanted to mention, guys, in the 20 plus minutes that Chevy spoke, he mentioned, money in, money out. He mentioned LTI, long-term injury reserve, several times. I thought I was, back in first year university at University of Winnipeg taking microeconomics. He was talking about supply and demand. And
how were your grades in that class?
I did actually pretty well in that class.
Oh,
not in some other ones, but I'll show you my transcript later, Drew. But
I didn't realize you could get that many Fs on one piece of paper.
Yeah, exactly. No, but it shows you what's happening with all of these teams up against the salary cap, and obviously Chevy also mentioned the flat cap, which we know is a huge impediment here for a lot of teams. But I wouldn't, for that reason, I wouldn't expect a lot of GMs, quarantine rules aside, to make moves that, have a lot of cap ramifications, right? Like we talked about it with Matthias Ekholm, that salary is very manageable, not just this year, but next year as well. And when you're talking about David Savard, he's obviously only got, 1 year left on his contract. So yeah, you might have to move some salary out, but that's not going to be difficult. It's not like we're talking about huge tickets here for these types of defensemen. So
no. And I saw some people earlier in the chats, talking about Erik Karlsson or something like that. Erik Karlsson has been
there's a 0% chance that happens.
Right. He's been a shell of himself.
Plus, who are you even moving out to make way for that contract?
More importantly, it's $11 million, right? I mean, you're not.
Well, that's my point.
You just don't have the room for it.
No, it's not. It's not an option. You're talking about Savard. The Jets have the room. I mean, they still have some space with the Brian Little LTIR status.
Yeah.
That they can, for a 1 year guy, or even for this year, they'll have enough room to acquire a guy, and then another very inexpensive option. They're going to have a few $1 million to play with under the salary cap, right around trade deadline time, because they're not using the full capacity of Brian Little's LTIR right now. So they'll have a little bit of money to play with. But I found it very interesting. Kevin Cheveldayoff's comments in the press conference. Let me read it verbatim. I have it up here on my second screen. Sometimes the improvements are internal, whether it's a young player getting an opportunity to play with the Moose right now, coming in and getting an opportunity to play with us and see what that does. Those are things that are certainly in our minds. So, to your point, Dave, the Jets do have talent with the Moose that is really getting ready to knock on the door, if they're not already knocking on the door. Heinola, Gustafsson, probably on a step down a little bit, Samberg and Vesalainen, because I don't think those guys are necessarily right there for this season. But I found it interesting that Chevy sort of address that, a little bit with his comments there, saying that, don't necessarily expect the additions to come from outside the organization. They might be internal additions coming up from the Manitoba Moose.
Yeah, and I would agree with you on Samberg. I would disagree on Vesalainen. I think Vesalainen has made big strides in his game this season.
Let me rephrase. I think he could be ready. I don't know that Paul Maurice trusts him enough to put him into the lineup.
Sure. I mean, that's okay. That's a good qualification. I would suggest that, Christian Vesalainen has made big strides in his game this season from what we saw last year. And I think, again, Vesalainen and Gustafsson, two guys who I think are now, again, it all depends. You don't want Christian Vesalainen going and playing 7 minutes a game. I think that's a complete waste of his talent. And we've talked about it. Do you want to have a top 3 lines that can score? And if you do, Christian Vesalainen provides you with a little, he's a big boy, and he can score. He can shoot the puck. And you saw elements in his game that weren't there before, right? A guy who's willing to go in the corners and fight for that puck. Again, not to the same level as a David Gustafsson. I mean, David Gustafsson to me, and again, I'm trying not to gush, but I really think he is a
Gustafsson.
Exactly.
I was waiting for you to do that one there, Ezzy.
No, but I mean, look, he's not going to come in and score 50 goals for the Winnipeg Jets. His offensive game has improved. We saw it, what he was doing in Sweden, and his ability to gain the zone is pretty impressive. He's just such a formidable, strong guy that I think that's one of those elements that when you have a young player, you don't necessarily, that's one of the things that's always the knock. He has to grow into his body. This guy's already a man at 20. And I think that's probably will serve him well if called upon to play in the NHL. So yeah, there's definitely internal options. And you got Logan Stanley. Logan Stanley again, talk about a bizarro world. If you would have told me, guys, that folks in Jets land were clamoring for Logan Stanley to get into this Jets lineup, I wouldn't believe you for all the money in the world. Like there's no chance, in no world did I ever believe that folks would be clamoring for Logan Stanley. And again, I say that as someone who watched every Logan Stanley game that he's played as a pro hockey player, almost every game. So, again, I think there are internal options that this team can use, and I think that's one of the things that Kevin Cheveldayoff is saying. But I mean, I'd be surprised if at minimum they don't acquire David Savard. I don't know that he's going to go, quote, big game hunting and get a Matthias Ekholm and have to come deal with that sort of ramifications of the draft from Seattle and the expansion draft and what they're going to have to do. But I think that I would think at a minimum he's going to get a player like David Savard. It makes a lot of sense for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah, and our friend Rob Somerville, made this point, and I agree. At times there is that physical presence, lacking on the back end. Even though like a guy like Neil Pionk has an underrated physical game. We talked about that with Weber 3 weeks back. Like for a smaller kind of offensive-minded player, Pionk has that physical element, and obviously, Tucker Poolman is a guy that can throw his weight around. Logan Stanley is a guy that can throw his weight around, but I agree, Dave. And to be honest with you, I don't think that there's that much of a difference. Like when you're talking Matthias Ekholm versus David Savard, I don't think like one of them, I don't think Ekholm is big game and then David Savard isn't. Like you're talking about top 4 defensemen. David Savard is in the top 4 of Columbus. Like he's a top 4 defenseman. He's not a third pairing defenseman. So I think both of those players are in the same category. I'm just saying, Dave, in terms of, what they can offer, they can play in your top 4. Yes, Matthias Ekholm, has a little bit of an offensive game. But a couple of years ago, I think Savard had, I want to say close to 10 goals, like 8 or 9 goals. And I know that he's earlier in his career, he had something like, I don't know what exactly, I'd have to look it up, but 11 or 12 goals. So, David Savard isn't, he had no goals last year, all year. And I understand that. But so I'm just saying, David Savard, it's not like David Savard can't put the puck in the net every once in a while. But you're getting. No, well, you can't. Of course, you can't expect that. I'm just saying, like, if you look at his career, he has actually had some decent offensive numbers, but he's expected to be more of a defensive defenseman. So you're right, Dave. There's no doubt. Even if Chevy says, that improvements might come internally, he's still has his eye on a defenseman. So again, we talked about a bunch of players like. And, Savard and Ekholm make the most sense, and we'll probably be talking about these guys, for the next couple of weeks, unless, Chevy does acquire one of them. But it's because they fill a hole on the Jets that is so obvious here. And even if, a guy like Ville Heinola does get to play some games, I do think that, they're going to look to acquire a defenseman.
Saturday morning, you're listening to the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. We are live on our YouTube channel as well as all of our social media feeds. I'm your host, Drew Mindell. We're joined by Ezra Ginsberg and Dave Minuk through the magic of technology. This segment of the Illegal Curve Hockey Show brought to you by Frank and Mauro Zappia of Zappia Group Realty, official realtors of Illegal Curve Hockey. When 95% of your clients come via referral, it shows your commitment to honesty, integrity, and a total dedication to client satisfaction. If you want to sell your home for more in less time, come shake hands with Frank and Mauro Zappia online at zappiagroup.com. Still to join us this morning on the program, we're going to be joined by Craig Button of TSN, and then at the top of the next hour, by Patrick Johnston. He covers the Vancouver Canucks for the Vancouver Province and the Vancouver Sun. The Jets, of course, into Vancouver for a 2-game series after tonight's contest in Edmonton. I wouldn't be shocked if you see a little bit of line juggling ahead of tonight's game for the Winnipeg Jets.
Hold on a second. We've been doing the show for 12 years. I was going to be shocked if you didn't say I wouldn't be shocked, because I'm pretty sure you say that every game, Drew, but pardon me, every show, but go ahead.
Thank you for pointing out my verbal tics. I'm sure that everybody appreciates that.
People will be looking for it now.
Yeah, well,
I have physical tics, Drew, so verbal tics are probably better.
That's a separate issue altogether there. So you might want to get that checked on. Somebody can probably look into that for you. But, just something to get that Copp, Andrew Copp is a player I think the Jets need to get a little bit more out of, and that they haven't seen sort of that same level of engagement that they saw maybe earlier in the year when he was playing higher up in the Jets lineup. So I wonder if Paul Maurice doesn't try and maybe shuffle things around a little bit to maybe see if you can generate a little bit more from Andrew Copp and, to a lesser extent, Adam Lowry. I think Mason Appleton's been going well still, but I wouldn't be shocked. I looked back at the last couple games, the possession numbers for the Copp, Lowry, Appleton line, where you typically would expect them to be higher up on among the Jets forward group, hasn't been there the last few games. So I wonder if that's an area that Paul Maurice looks to maybe rejuvenate a little ahead of tonight's game in Edmonton and then entering into next week in Vancouver.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I'm just not sure, what the move would be, right? Like, I don't think you're going to break up Dubois, Connor, and Ehlers because they've been playing so well. And we know that Paul Maurice always keeps Scheifele and Wheeler together. So does that mean that a player like Paul Stastny moves down? Because we've seen that a little bit, right, guys? You go back, what was it? I don't know, 4 weeks ago? What was the line? It was it Stastny, Appleton, and Lowry, if I'm not mistaken? They played a little bit together. But I'm just not sure, Drew. Like, I agree with what you're saying because, Andrew Kopp, I think he had 9 points in his first, 6 games or 7 games. He had that 4-point game. And the offense has dried up a little bit, unfortunately. Obviously, it doesn't, mean anything. I mean, I think Andrew Kopp is a capable offensive player as well as being a reliable defensive player. But I just don't know, what the move would be. I realize there's some people that are calling for, a Blake Wheeler, Andrew Kopp switch, right? Which would mean Wheeler goes down and he plays with Adam Lowry and Mason Appleton. I just don't know. I simply don't know if Paul Maurice would even consider that. So So it's either Andrew Kopp switching for Paul Stastny on the left wing or Blake Wheeler on the right wing, essentially, unless you guys, think that there's a chance, Kopp plays on the Dubois line. I don't see it, Dave. Like Dubois, Connor, and Ehlers over the last 4 or 5 games, I think are playing their best hockey of the season and have become the Jets' best offensive line in terms of shot attempts and possession. But we know that Andrew Kopp and Adam Lowry and Mason Appleton have been really good. The offense just hasn't been there, even though Adam Lowry scored his first goal recently in 19 games. But there's no doubt, Drew, that you'd like to see more production. Right? Like it's a cliche, but you'd like to see more goals. You'd like to see, Andrew Kopp getting his name on the score sheet a little bit more, aside from, getting penalty kill time. So we'll see what happens. But I wouldn't, I'm not that worried about that line because that line has been really good, even though Mason Appleton, same thing. Like maybe, he had the nice goal against Toronto. I don't think he has a goal in his last 3 games, but, you look at that line and I'm not too worried about it because it's been fairly consistent as far as the Jets forward lines go.
One goal from Andrew Kopp, Dave, in the last 10 games. That's in the month of March. So, I mean, not that you expect Andrew Kopp to necessarily be, pumping in goal after goal after goal, but I do think that there is some untapped offensive upside that I wouldn't mind seeing, maybe Paul Maurice juggle things around, to my point, just to try and maybe get that going a little bit more. Because we know that, any offense you're getting from Perreault, Thompson, and Lewis is unexpected. I mean, even though Perreault obviously got the nice goal on Thursday night in Edmonton, that line is just not going to be an offensive production line for the team. I mean, and we can talk about their usage, of course, and whether or not that should even be a line that is a regular line. If we shouldn't see the Jansen Harkins opportunity there, but I just want to see a little bit more balance. That's why I was asking Sarah when she joined us about an hour ago, is that maybe do we get to see Paul Stastny move off the wing and go back up the middle to try and generate a little bit more offense a little lower down in the Jets lineup?
Yeah, and I think that you're right, Drew. And I think that's what I spoke about that before Sarah came on, was that idea of switching things up. And you're not switching things up simply for the sake of switching things up. And people will point out that the Jets record would be indicative of the fact that they've won a lot of games right now with the current lineup. I would point to the fact that they've won a lot of games because their goaltending has been very good on many a night. And that has helped them, secure some victories, even when they were getting caved in by the opposition. But I mean, at the end of the day, you can't just have one line going in the NHL. Because otherwise every team can shut that one line down, right? So I think that's one of the things you have to focus on, is not just having the Dubois line going. You want to have everybody contributing. And look, if you can get a goal here from Matthew Perreault and that fourth line, that's a great thing. That's not a bad thing. Nobody's going to complain about that. If your fourth line is giving you some contribution, that's a good thing. But you need all 3 of your top 9 to be really generating offense. And that's one of the things that, we haven't seen as much of late. So that's one of the things that you would think, okay, well, here's an opportunity. Now, Paul Maurice may not be so inclined because, again, that first game against the Oilers a couple of days ago wasn't really necessarily indicative of what we've come to expect from either team, really. So is it a true representation? My guess is he may not make any changes today, to your point, Drew, because they haven't had that practice time, because he hasn't had an opportunity to give those guys the ability, even if they've played together, you want to have that muscle memory of that last game. So to my thought would be he's probably not going to make any changes for tonight. We may see those changes come about when they play the Canucks.
This is the big thing. And Drew makes a good point here because, again, I think you guys are in agreement with me. The Dubois line is not being broken up. So you're talking about Paul Stastny moving off that line and becoming the third line center, which pushes Adam Lowry down to the fourth line. And again, I agree with Dave. I don't think this is going to happen tonight versus Edmonton, but that's a possibility. Or you're moving Blake Wheeler down the lineup. And I realize that, in this city, that's, almost unthinkable that Blake Wheeler would be moved off of the Scheifele line. But
I don't think it's unthinkable in the city, Ezzy. Sorry. I think it's unthinkable to Jets head coach Paul Maurice.
Yeah, well, fair enough. I think for some Jets fans, it's unthinkable, but that's what you're talking about. And I would lean towards not what I would do, but what I think could happen is what you said, Drew. Yeah, absolutely. And that's what we talked about when the Jets acquired Pierre-Luc Dubois from Columbus, that you could go up the middle with Scheifele, Dubois, Stastny, and Lowry. And then you'd obviously have to figure out, what the construction of that fourth line would be. That would mean obviously Nate Thompson comes out of the lineup. So are you going to go with, Lowry, Perreault, and Lewis? That's most likely what you're going to go with. And then obviously there's always, the Jansen Harkins factor, and he could be, on the fourth line for Trevor Lewis, even though Paul Maurice said he likes Lewis in there because he kills penalties, and Harkins isn't going to be a guy, which I don't necessarily know why Harkins can't kill penalties, because as Dave knows, he's capable of killing penalties. So we'll see what happens, but that would be my guess. If Andrew Kopp if Kopp moves up in the lineup, Drew, I would expect it to be for Paul Stastny, which would move him back to center. That would just be my best bet.
I think if you start to shuffle things around, if you move Stastny off the wing, and all of a sudden your centermen are what we talked about when the trade first happened. If your centermen are Scheifele, Dubois, Stastny, Lowry, I don't think the only time you're at in the defensive zone that you're at a disadvantage among centermen is with Scheifele. Defensively, I mean, if Connor McDavid jumps out on the ice and you can counter with one of Dubois, Stastny, or Lowry, I think that you're reasonably happy with that matchup. Obviously, McDavid is an otherworldly hockey player, and you might not be able to stop him. But even against Austin Matthews in Toronto, if all of a sudden that one of your centermen is one of those guys, as opposed to Nate Thompson, no disrespect intended to Nate Thompson there, I think you like that matchup a lot more if you're Jets head coach Paul Maurice.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, it kind of feels like we're beating a dead horse here, because we've talked about the reason why you acquired Pierre-Luc Dubois was to give you center depth that would be able to match up with anybody else in the North. And so if again, that would necessitate Paul Stastny moving to your third line center and Adam Lowry being your fourth line center. And again, is that a sign of disrespect to Adam Lowry? Not really, because how hard is it to play your lines in a more balanced fashion? And that to me is what you need to do.
No argument there. We're hoping to get Craig Button on the program coming up here momentarily. I want to shift focus to what we left off with last week with Paul Maurice, because we never last week on the show we did our evaluations of the Winnipeg Jets at the halfway mark, who was exceeding our expectations, who was underperforming our expectations, and who was meeting our expectations. We left off with Jets head coach Paul Maurice. We never got to talk about him, and I think there's a worthwhile conversation to be had regarding the performance of Paul Maurice this season. And I know everything that I'm picturing in my mind right now is the Paul Maurice GIF that everyone loves to, the waving GIF, exactly, where everyone likes to tweet that anytime you talk about the coaching situation for the Winnipeg Jets. How would you guys evaluate Paul Maurice at this point of the season? The same question can go to those who are joining us in the chat room. What have you liked about the job Paul Maurice has done? What have you disliked about the job that Paul Maurice has done so far this season as Jets head coach? Ezzy, you're on mute, buddy.
When you look at the Jets record, sorry about that, there's a lot to like, but then, you look a little bit deeper into the analytics, like we've talked about the expected goals, the high danger chances against, things like that. And, there's some troubling concerns about this team defensively. And at the end of the day, the head coach is responsible for the way the team plays defensively and offensively. So in that regard, I think, you look at the systems, and there's a lot of times when, the Jets have problems defending in their own zone. But, overall, the Jets have done a really good job of bouncing back after a loss and not letting any losing streaks happen here, guys. Like, we're 30 games into the season, and the Jets have only lost 2 games in a row once, and that was earlier in the season. right? They haven't lost.
And one of them was in overtime.
Exactly. So they haven't lost 2 regulation games in a row. Sure. So, I mean, that's pretty impressive when you're 30 games into a season. Like they're tied, or pardon me, they're in second place, a couple of points back of first place. So that alone, I mean, means that he's obviously doing something right. Does Connor Hellebuyck have a lot to do with that? Yes, of course he has a lot to do with that. But I think, the inability sometimes to make moves on the roster is something that, I'm not the only person that sees that. I mean, it's not just, when it comes to the forwards, it's not just when it comes to the defensemen, but I think, a player like Jansen Harkins is somebody that I would like to see in the lineup. Paul Maurice has given his reasons why, and obviously, he doesn't care what I have to say. But I think when Matty Perreault is playing as well as he's playing, and Nate Thompson and Trevor Lewis are playing as well as they're playing, it's tough to get a guy like Jansen Harkins in. But overall, I mean, the special teams have been fairly strong. The Jets are top 10 in the league in power play. The penalty kill hasn't been as good as it's been, but I think overall he's done a fairly good job. I think it would just overall be the team defense and sometimes the Jets' inability to get through periods without giving up, 6 or 7 high danger chances and a couple of goals. Right now, this Jets team is clicking offensively. There's no doubt about it. Maybe not so much on Thursday night, but defensively, that's the biggest area of weakness on the Jets. And it's not all on the coaching staff, but a lot of it is on the coaching staff.
Dave, Nate Thompson is such a sort of a perfect example to me about Paul Maurice and where he wears his blinders. And, why does Nate Thompson need to be in the lineup? So what we've heard from Paul Maurice is he likes him for the penalty killing, job that he does. He likes him for the, his responsibility in the defensive zone. So I went back. Nate Thompson, he was injured, of course, and missed a big chunk of time. He's been a regular now in the Jets lineup since February 19th. How many seconds a game do you think he plays on the penalty kill?
7 to 15.
24 seconds. So you're not too far off. So it's a minimal. He's the 5th penalty killer out on the ice for the Winnipeg Jets.
It's basically to take faceoffs late in a penalty kill is what that is.
Which, okay, so I checked out his face-off numbers. His defensive zone face-off winning percentage since rejoining the team on February 19th or becoming a regular in the lineup on February 19th is 51.4%, which is the best on the team. So he does get credit for that. He is the best at, defensive zone face-off winning percentage over the past month or so. But is that one factor enough to keep a guy in the lineup? Because to me, when you got Stastny and Lowry, those guys should be able to at least get pretty close to a 51% number. That that shouldn't be the tipping point to keeping a guy in the lineup.
No, I mean, and again, I think I've been pretty on board with my suggestion that I think if you can provide yourself with that sort of center depth as we've outlined, why not avail yourself of it? You have many talented forwards who could jump up and play, in that Jansen Harkins. Jansen Harkins could be a winger who's shown chemistry with Blake Wheeler. So I mean, you can put Jansen Harkins into a scoring role. I mean, the guy put up. Look, the AHL is not the NHL, right? But he put up 31 points in 31 games for the Manitoba Moose before he got called up by the Winnipeg Jets last year. So Jansen Harkins can play offense, and he's a smart player. So Christian Vesalainen, there's another guy who is a strong offensive player. I mean, if you need offensive guys, you've got them in your bag of tricks. So you don't necessarily need to have, again, to me, Adam Lowry. And again, it goes to that old way of thinking, right? Like, do you need a fourth line checking, role team on the team? Sorry. And Ezzy loves to quote the Islanders and what the Islanders are able to roll out. And so to me, it's like you're not expecting. Look, Adam Lowry's he's a UFA. He's in a contract year. He's had a better production year than he did last season. But at the same time, again, wouldn't it be great from a Jets perspective to have 3 lines that score consistently and a 4th line that you feel? Because to your point, Drew, like the Appleton, Lowry, and Kopp line, we're getting caved the last few games. And it was interesting because it's not something we're used to seeing from them. They were spending a lot of time in the Jet zone. They were spending a lot of time not getting that puck out of the out of the Jets' end, which is not something we're used to seeing. So again, maybe if you put them into a role that is a little reduced slightly at 5-on-5, then you're able to give them the opportunities. You can use them in an effective manner. And again, that's just my own opinion, which I'm entitled to. But
you are entitled to your own opinion. Yes,
I know. So
not your own facts, your own opinion.
No, I the facts are all that I see. What I see in the game and what I'm following in the numbers. But again, I just think like it's such a luxury to have center depth. So why not avail yourself of it? Most teams wish that they could have, Scheifele, Dubois, Stasny, and Lowry. That's a top four. That's just as good as any in the NHL. So why not use it?
Well, yeah, I agree with you 100%. And I was going to say that, it's old school thinking to think that a fourth line can only be a checking line. The reason why I like that Islanders line, and I think, many teams and coaches around the NHL look at that line. First off, there aren't that many fourth lines that have been together that long. And so, Casey Zizekas a couple of years back had 20 goals. So it's not like a fourth line, is full of guys that only have a few goals, right, Dave?
Yeah.
So I think, that's what you want. And you mentioned this earlier, like there have been nights as of late, and let's not forget the Jets have lost 3 of their last 5 games. So, I'm not saying the Jets have been playing poorly, because last Saturday night was arguably their most impressive game in that win over the Leafs. But, you haven't had as much production from those bottom lines as you probably like. I'm not talking about Matty Perreault, because Matty Perreault has been putting the puck in the net. It's as a whole. It's not just one player. You can't look at a line as just one guy. It's the type of production you're getting from the bottom 2 lines. And yeah, that's why, even though Jansen Harkins, didn't have any points in his 11 or 12 games, whatever it was. I mean, the point is you're trying to move pieces around, whether that's bringing them into the lineup or, moving maybe Matty Perreault up to the third line. I don't know, but you're just trying to get more consistency out of these lines so that you can play them 11, 12, 13 minutes a game. I'm talking more about the fourth line, because we know that, Kopp, Lowry, Appleton are going to play much more than, 8 or 9 minutes. But that's, I think, what you're looking for here. And obviously the Jets have a lot of time here, boys, and they have the luxury of, being a top 3 team in the division right now. But I think they're in a part of the schedule right now where you do have, a lot of offense coming from the Dubois line. And yeah, Scheifele, Stastny, Wheeler, it's not like they've been bad by any stretch of the imagination, but there's definitely, I think the word I would use is the bottom 6 might be a little bit stale at this point.
I think that's a good way to put it. And when we come back, we're going to take a quick commercial break here for a minute or two. When we come back, I want to talk about the week upcoming for the Winnipeg Jets and really look at the North Division as a whole, because I think this coming week with those 2 games against, after tonight's game against Edmonton, and we're not overlooking that, but this, the 2 games against Vancouver and then the 3 games against Calgary, I think the Jets have an opportunity to really affirm themselves, and get as close to a guaranteed playoff spot as you can at this point in the season with good results. So I want to talk about that next. You're listening to the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. We are live on YouTube and all of our social media platforms.
Keeping Winnipeg laughing for over 30 years. Rumors, Canada's longest-running comedy club, bringing you the biggest laughs from the best comedians on the planet. Jerry Seinfeld, Chris Rock, Jon Stewart, Dennis Miller, Brad Garrett, the greats, and all the up-and-comers too. When was the last time you laughed out loud? Make it a great night out with friends, or book your office or birthday party. Even a fundraising event at Rumors. Get all the details and dates on upcoming shows at rumorscomedyclub.com.
Hey, Drew.
Ezzy, whoa, what a smile!
Yeah, I got my crowns done at Linden Market Dental Center, and they whiten my teeth.
I see.
They're so bright that every time I smile, they go,
"We have hockey tonight. Do you have a mouth guard to protect those pearly whites?"
"I sure do."
Whoa, they even ting through the mouth guard.
Linden Market Dental Center covers all your dental needs from restorative to cosmetic dentistry and will fit you with a sports guard for that active lifestyle. 877 Waverly. See lindenmarketdental.com.
Hi, it's Drew from Illegal Curve here. Selling your home can be stressful, but it wasn't for me. Thanks to my friends at Zappia Group Realty, they made the process so easy. My home sold within 48 hours and with multiple offers. Zappia Group Realty took care of everything with their exquisite customer service and attention to detail. If you want to sell your home for more in less time, get started by talking to Frank and Mauro Zappia of Zappia Group Realty. Online at zappiagroup.com.
While you can't always count on your team winning, nor your favorite player scoring, one thing you can always count on is Bernstein's Deli. They've expanded their services because the team at Bernstein's Deli wants to accommodate your needs and keep you safe. Open Tuesday to Saturday from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. to serve you. Head to your phone, in-store or online to shop for groceries or order meals from the restaurant, like the legendary Illegal Curve sandwich. Just go to bernsteinsdeli.com.
So you're a pizza person, you married a wing person, but somehow your kids are salad people. You can't pick your fam, but you can pick your BP meal deal, starting from $18.99 for takeout or delivery at bostonpizza.com.
Saturday morning, we're back on the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. Drew Mindell, Ezra Ginsburg, Dave Minuk with you. Going to be joined by Patrick Johnston of Post Media in Vancouver in about 15 minutes' time to talk about the Vancouver Canucks, the Vancouver Canucks team that is on fire. Victors last night against the Montreal Canadiens. And of course, the Habs take the game into overtime, which they seem to do every single night. They don't win in overtime ever, but they never lose in regulation either, which is why the Habs record is really a bizarre looking one in the standings right now.
It really is, though. It's like bordering on absurd. I just got a text from Craig Button. I think he is ready to jump on with us, but
okay.
Yeah, it is bordering on absurd. What are they, 0-8 now in overtime, or 0-9?
Something like that.
It's tough to do that.
They are 0-9 in overtime, 13-8-9 on the season, which means they have 9 losses in either overtime or the shootout, and only 8 losses in regulation. So it is an utterly bizarre record for the Montreal Canadiens this year. But that's not what we're talking about. The Vancouver Canucks. So the Jets obviously have Edmonton tonight, and then they have Vancouver Monday and Wednesday. The Canucks right now 4 points behind the Jets. The Jets have those 4 games in hand, which is obviously a huge factor there. But if the Jets can go into Vancouver on Monday, Wednesday, and if they were able to take those 4 points, or a good number of those 4 points, 3 out of the 4, then that's basically almost putting that to bed right now, as far as I'm concerned, given the number of games the Jets still have in hand on the Canucks.
Yeah, and I don't think there's any question about it, and that's what we've talked about, why the Jets are still positioned well, even though things are tightening up in the north, because aside from Montreal, they have games in hand on everyone. So I think that's one of the, or Edmonton, sorry, but and Montreal. And I think that's one of the things that you're going to look at, and that's one of the things, again, you have to win those games, Drew, and you mentioned that in the first hour, so that'll be incumbent on the Winnipeg Jets to continue to win, but I think that they can do it.
Yeah, I mean, and tonight, and then you go next week, you got the 3 games against the Calgary Flames, and this Calgary Flames team is a different Calgary Flames team than we've seen so far this season because of the new addition. The Jets haven't seen a Daryl Sutter-led Calgary Flames team so far, and we know they had the embarrassing defeat to the Edmonton Oilers on Wednesday night, where they got absolutely kicked by the Oilers, but then they bounced back last night and they defeat the Toronto Maple Leafs. So this Calgary Flames team, which I think for a lot of the season was playing, without an identity, I would say, or not a really clearly defined identity, is beginning to get that under Daryl Sutter. Whether or not that's the best use of their players, time will tell. And I'm not convinced that they're going to all of a sudden become a playoff team, but I think they're going to be a much more disciplined and a much more organized, let's say, Calgary Flames team than what we saw previously under Jeff Ward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you're seeing more balanced scoring. You had 4 different goal scorers yesterday. Obviously, the captain, Mark Giordano, getting the the game winner. And, you're right, Drew. I mean, they're definitely getting the Daryl Sutter bump right now. And I think at times there was a little bit of, passiveness, to their game. And, Jacob Markstrom, we know, is an excellent goaltender, and, he wasn't the issue at all. I think, what you were seeing was if, players like Johnny Gaudreau, Sean Monahan, Elias Lindholm, and Matthew Tkachuk weren't scoring, that, that was really leading to the Flames not having an offense to be in some of these games. But I don't think that at any point, during the season, did I think that, the Flames were a bad team. I just didn't think that they were getting the results. And obviously all teams are going to count on their top players, no different than the Jets, with Mark Scheifele, Kyle Connor, Nick Ehlers, and, we know the list, throw in, Pierre-Luc Dubois in there as well. The question is, can Calgary keep this going? Because, they've had to win all of these games just to stay in the playoff race. They still haven't got over that playoff line. So we'll see what happens here. Obviously, the 3 games against the Jets, are going to have a big say in that, because if the Jets are able to take 2 of these 3 games, it's going to be really tough, for Calgary to get into this. They're going to have to continue to win, 3 out of every 5 games, 4 out of every 5 games. But there's no doubt that Daryl Sutter has brought in some accountability, and he's producing results early on, and it's nice to see, because we don't want any of these teams to be completely out of the playoff picture. It makes for a better hockey shows, and it makes for better, races when it looked like there were only 4 teams in the playoff race. So now you've got Vancouver and Calgary, as I mentioned, last hour, that have clawed their way back into it here. And it's nice to see, because, there were pretty high expectations for both of those teams, not just Calgary, but, Vancouver as well, getting to the second round of the playoffs last year.
Well, the Vancouver Canucks, I mean, the numbers speak for themselves since the month of March began. So that's 10 games ago for the Canucks. 8-2. So, I mean, you can say what you want, that it might be a little bit too, might be too little too late, but an 8-2 record in a month, Dave, that's an .800 winning percentage. That's pretty good. And we have seen teams, you think back to the St. Louis Blues, go on those, crazy runs that are backstopped by goaltending. And goaltending, of course, is the great equalizer. I mean, now that they've established Thatcher Demko as their number 1 goaltender in Vancouver, this is what the Jets have to worry about. His record in the last 9 games, 8-1. He's got .950 save percentage and a 1.74 goals against average. I mean, those are incredible numbers for Thatcher Demko and the Vancouver Canucks.
Yeah, and we thought Thatcher Demko was going to be the guy, especially after what we saw from him in the play-in series and in the playoffs, I should say. And so, I mean, I'm not really surprised. He was picked to be the next guy in Vancouver, and so we're seeing what he can do. Now that they have to give him an opportunity to make a run. And again, you're always going to have to do it, but that's what the Jets rely on too. They've got a pretty good goaltender in Connor Hellebuyck and Laurent Brossoit, goaltending tandem, I should say. So that's something both teams have to deal with.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun week. I mean, that's really what it boils down to. This is, I think, a very important week for the Winnipeg Jets. They're at now the other side of the halfway mark of the season. And what you're going to see here, if you can take care of business in the next week, where you have these, starting tonight, you have tonight, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then, of course, next Saturday and next Monday, if you can take care of business, with these next 4 games that are upcoming, you do get that separation where I think you can begin to almost refocus. You're not looking in the rearview mirror nearly as much as you are chasing or atop the division and continuing to build momentum going forward to the playoff stretch drive, Dave. And that's it's we're not that far away from where that really has to be your focus. We're less than a month away from the trade deadline, and then from there it just it's going to be a rapid fire situation until the playoffs actually begin.
Yeah, and I think that's why I talk about it. It doesn't really sometimes matter how you do it. It's about what you do, and adding points to the standings bank, as I like to refer to it, is critical. And that's what the Jets have done. And that's what the Jets have consistently done. The Jets have consistently not lost 2 games in a row. And as a result, they've managed to bank points that have allowed them to stay in this tight North Division and stay pretty close. I mean, remember, this is a team that most pundits didn't have even making the playoffs or fighting for that 4th and final playoff spot. And now they look like a team that's going to fight with Edmonton and Toronto for that first spot. So again, they've done what they needed to do, which is accumulate points to put themselves into a good position to fight for, a really good position in the North Division.
Pleased to be joined now by our good friend on the program, TSN Director of Scouting, Craig Button, joining us on the program. Craig, good morning. Thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate you, and nice to see you on this Saturday morning.
Yeah, sorry. I was waiting in backstage. I was a little slow getting up there with Chrome, and then I was backstage, and I was waiting. I didn't hear any music. It's okay to be backstage, but I didn't hear any music.
Sorry about that, Craig. I might have sent you the wrong link, so that's on me.
Don't even sweat it. I just all kidding aside, here we are.
Exactly. We made it. No worse for wear, Craig. Always, talking about the Winnipeg Jets as we do each and every Saturday. And we're just talking about the North Division. From your perspective, you've watched the Jets. We've seen you on the broadcast, with Sarah Orlesky doing, the intermission analysis. When you're watching this Winnipeg Jets team, what are you seeing, more often than not from your perspective?
Well, I see a team that's, when they have the puck, they're pretty darn good and they're very dangerous. And, that should be no surprise. I mean, when you have Scheifele and Wheeler and Dubois, and Nikolai Ehlers has taken his game to another level. And it's really interesting to watch Nikolai because I don't think he would have been able to do it in the same manner with Patrick Laine still there. And, I watch a team and, obviously Kyle Connor, Paul Stastny's really been impressive. I love their forwards. I really do. And I think they have a different group of forwards. They have skill, but they can attack you and put you into uncomfortable positions multiple ways, and they can do it with the Lowry line. I mean, Nate Thompson scores a really big goal the other night. So I just like the way they're formed and the way their team looks. Connor Hellebuck, just put a check mark there. I mean, don't even worry when he starts. And Laurent Brossoit has been really good this year. I'm going to say something that's as obvious as the nose on my face. If they can improve that defense, they will only improve their chances for advancing. I mean, that's as simple as that. And it doesn't have to be a number one defenseman. I mean, that would be lovely, right? But there's not. But somebody that can, give you 20 minutes, somebody that can give you 19 minutes of really good play in some area of the game. And that takes some of the pressure off of Pionk and takes some of the pressure off of Morrissey. I think Derek Forbort has been a terrific addition. Pullman gives you everything he has, but if they can find a way to add a player that can play within that group of the top pairs, the two top pairs, I think they'll be that much better. Because that's the one area where, they're fortunate to have Connor Hellebuck because he literally is a safety net a lot of nights for the Winnipeg Jets.
Craig, wanted to ask you about the Calgary Flames. Of course, you used to be the GM of the Calgary Flames, and your brother is still a part of that organization, of course. And when you look at this Flames team, like we knew that there was going to be changes under Daryl Sutter. Like what have you seen as the biggest change? Obviously the wins have been a change, but like aside from the fact that everybody looks at Daryl Sutter and knows how good of a coach he is and the type of coach he is, like what has he just got more out of this team than Jeff Ward?
Well, I think Ezra, absolutely the second part is true. And a coach's job is to maximize the potential of the team and have the players play to the best of their abilities. That's a coach's job. There's no oh well, he's not playing well. You got to find ways to get the team to play better and to form, and you got to have players play to the best of their abilities. And Jeff didn't do a very good job. It's simple as that, and that's why he was replaced. Daryl, it's a paradox. I've used this term before. It's a paradox to say when you're patient, you'll be quicker. It doesn't seem to fall. But by that, what I mean is, he has the players play very patiently in their positioning. Get in the right position, defend it fiercely. Don't be chasing out of your position and being vulnerable, right? And then if you're in the right position, you are going to be able to be very quick to make a play defensively. You're going to be very quick to transition, and you're going to be very quick to go to be in offensive spots. If you're always chasing and if you think about it, if you move 3 feet out of a position, it takes you 6 feet to make up for it if it goes the other way. And so that's a lot of space to make up in a very short period of time. And as fast as Connor McDavid is, or as Nikolai Ehlers is, not even those guys can make up that kind of space in that amount of time. So, it sounds funny that it's math, right? It is math. But Daryl has given them a very clear focus. Here's what we got to do. Here's how we play together. Here's how our position is, number one. And that was significant. They're defending the blue line better. They're not giving up the quality shots in front of the net because their position is tighter. As for the individual players, Daryl is very, very clear. He looks at a player and he says, okay, here's what I think you can do. Here's what I want to see you do. And he gives that clear direction. But also with it, he also says, listen, I'm not going to ask you to do more than you're capable of, but you better not give me less. Because if you give me less, we're going to have big problems. And so it's clear. The players don't have to think about, well, do I do this? Do I that? He lays it right out for them as clear can be. And as you point out, that's why he's such a good coach, and that's why he's been such a good coach for such a long time.
Craig Button is our guest on the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. We're live on YouTube and all of our social media platforms. You know Craig, of course, from his time you're working the intermissions for the Winnipeg Jets. He's also TSN's director of scouting.
Well, and Craig, speaking of scouting, prospects can sometimes take a long time. And we live in an instant gratification society. And I got to tell you, I watched every Logan Stanley game he played for the Manitoba Moose. And I, who thought he was an NHL capable defenseman, didn't think he would get to this level yet. And yet he's done that because of his hard work during the offseason. But is his story a cautionary tale for all the people who are quick to label a draft pick a bust because they're not right in the NHL?
Yeah, Dave, I would say that, the way you described that is very, very accurate. And the instant gratification too. It's absolutely amazing. I mean, Logan, really what he is, he's an overnight success in 5 years. It's unbelievable how good he's been since he was drafted. I mean, Logan and players have to develop in different ways. And Logan, obviously his development steps were going to be different than somebody else's because of the style of player he was. I mean, I don't care if you're 6'6" like Logan Stanley or you're Ville Heinola, who's 5'11". To play defense in the National Hockey League, you have to learn how to gain leverage. And so for the big Logan Stanley player, it's no different the leverage he has. He just has to learn it in a different way. The weight over his body, the ability to carry that weight, everything that goes with leverage and defending, beating pressure. And so, as you talk about watching him, you see this potential. He's always been good with the puck. He's always had a real good sense of the game. But it was always going to be about the leverage and the skating and letting his body come into form. I mean, they call it coordination and strengthening, but that's what it was. And now you watch him be able to handle some of those things, beat the pressure below the goal line, defend, because if you can't get leverage, I don't care if you're 6'6", players are going to go right in and around you because they get in so tight and in on your body that it becomes really hard if you don't have that leverage. That's what he's developed. Dave, it's funny for me when I hear something like, "Oh, wow, what a great player! This guy's going to be great." It's one game. Or in the case of Alexis Lafreniere, "Oh my God, what's wrong with him?" Well, nothing's wrong with either one of them. They're like, but we are impatient, and one of the things, and I see this a lot now. NHL teams are trying to temper expectations, but at the same time, it's hard to temper expectations for some teams because you're selling this. So when you start selling something and it's their own mistake, all of a sudden now the expectations raise. And it's not the fans' fault. It's the team's fault. I'll tell you a quick story. I hope it can be quick. A lot of times I'm not as quick as my intentions, as I set out in my intentions. But I was sitting with Mike Modano at training camp one year. And I don't know if he was 21 or 22, somewhere in that age range. He's the first overall pick. We're just sitting around talking. And he says to me, he goes, "Craig," he goes, we draft these players and they're young kids. And, and he goes, and you say, he's going to be a 30-goal scorer. He goes, "We get excited as players. We get really excited. We go, wow, 30-goal scorer. Wow, this is great. We're getting a 30-goal scorer." And he said, he goes, "So if that player turns out to be a 30-goal scorer," he goes, "well, that's just what he was supposed to be. Great. But if he doesn't," he said, like somehow there's a disappointment. There's a disappointment of the fans. We kind of think, "Oh, geez, we thought we were getting a 30-goal scorer." Maybe frame it differently. Maybe just try to say, "Hey, listen, we're going to get a really good a really good player. We think that he's got a chance to, contribute offensively." He said, "Don't put numbers and all these expectations on him. Be positive about him." And I kind of looked and I said, "This is the first overall pick." So he was speaking from some of his own experiences, but I can tell you what, from that point on, and with Minnesota and Dallas, we never ever from that point on put like 30-goal scorer. top two defense, number two defense, all those things. We just described the player, why we were excited about the player, and that we were going to work with him. So but your team's struggling and you have a high draft pick and, oh yeah, this is the future and this is what's going to happen. And like Cole Caulfield, who Montreal drafted. I mean, he's a terrific player. He's going to win the Hobey Baker. He's the best player in college hockey. There's no question about it. And I've been asked, do you think he's ready to play? I said, I don't know if he's ready to play. I don't know. But here's what I would say. He's an elite goal scorer. And the Montreal Canadiens don't have that. So you know what? Say we're going to give him a chance. Don't say he's going to come in and score and he's the answer to our problems. Say, we see an elite goal scorer and we're going to give him a chance and an opportunity. And if he's not ready, that's okay. But he's dominated college hockey. He brings something you don't have. So frame it in a different way. We're giving this player that we have really high hopes for an opportunity. If it doesn't mean he's failed. But when you start to say, yeah, we really think he's going to come in and help our power play. He's the trigger man we need to get on the right side. Well, now you've raised the expectations. What you've also done is put pressure on the player too. So and players feel the pressure. And the younger they are, when they don't have those accomplishments and those experiences, the harder it is for them.
Craig Button is TSN's director of scouting. You see him at intermissions during the Winnipeg Jets broadcasts on TSN. Craig, appreciate your time, appreciate your insight. Our apologies for the little bit of the hiccup before, but thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Always a pleasure to join you guys. Wishing you the best here. And when I can join you and you ask me to join you, I'll be happy to do so. So have a great Saturday, first day of spring.
There you
Absolutely.
go.
Craig. Thanks, Craig.
We're going to hold you to that. Thanks so much. There he goes, Craig Button. And we're pleased to seamlessly welcome back to the program our good friend from Post Media in Vancouver. I got to say, a devilishly handsome man, if there has ever been one, Patrick Johnston from the Vancouver Sun and the Vancouver Province. Patrick, good to see you.
Are you guys cousins?
I mean, it's a spitting image. Frankly, we've never had a better looking left side of the screen than we currently do right now on the program.
Well, I mean, if this is the way it's going to work out with, you guys getting unceremoniously booted off the airwaves, this is the way to do it.
That's
you
right.
Can see how handsome up and down are, and I don't know what. Or wait, over here, this side over there.
What's going on over there? Exactly.
Hi guys, how are we?
We're doing great, Patrick. Thanks for joining us, and I hope you enjoyed listening to Craig there. He's so eloquent and talks so well about the game. It's nice to listen to.
The thing I'll say about Craig is I appreciate the self-awareness because he knows he's got these stories, and like Craig and I have never actually talked on the phone. We've texted because he's like, "Well, how about this time?" And time doesn't work, and he just knows he just doesn't have the window.
Yeah.
Still, he needs this much, and I can only give him this much, and he goes, "Nope." So, no, I appreciate it. I love Craig.
Exactly. Patrick obviously brought you on to talk about the Vancouver Canucks, the impressive Vancouver Canucks as of late. Winners last night in Vancouver in overtime, a beautiful goal by JT Miller. Thatcher Demko, who we'll talk about during this interview, is playing out of this world, reminiscent of what we saw in the bubble last summer. Is it too little too late, or do they still have a chance?
Well, I was going to say impressive in this case is spelled DEMKO. I mean, last night's game was a statement. It was a huge statement because most of this month, because it's been basically March 1 and you turn the page since they played the Jets. And it's been this run. They've won 8 of 10 and 7 of those wins have had Demko in net. And, really other than last night, 6 of them have been about the play of their goalie. Anyway, I've got the math all right. It's 7 games. I can't even remember anymore. I've lost track. It's been so bizarre. That's how crazy it's been because Thatcher Demko's goal save percentage this month is .952. And that's the story here. Do they have a hope? Yes. I think the real story continues to be what is that playoff bar going to be? Because they've sort of pulled themselves back towards where they needed to be. For the longest time, we thought the bar was going to be like 62, 63 points. Now I see we're talking more like maybe 67 just because you're looking at how well the Oilers are playing, how well the Jets are playing, what happens with the Flames, the Habs. Yeah, I mean, it was interesting to hear Craig talk about they don't have that high-end score. Of course, the Tyler Toffoli story has been never ending here. But I mean, the truth is that he's their best goal scorer. I mean, he's a heck of a player, but he's not that like top end Elias Pettersson, Mark Scheifele, Kyle Connor, like top end guy. So, in many ways, is sort of the statement. The Canadians they've got a nice sort of second tier of depth everywhere. They don't have that top end guy. The Canucks, of course, don't have Pettersson, so I mean that's a bit of a story. Not going to have him tonight, and not going to have him for the 2-game set this week against the Jets. They put him on LTIR last night. So yeah, they have a fighting chance, but they got to keep doing this. Like they've got to play. I think it was 685 hockey the rest of the way, and they were a 500 team. And for a lot of the year, they were like a 450 team. So. I mean, it's what's more likely that they're going to be a 650 team or a 500 team. I think they're going to be a 500 team. That's just not going to get them there.
Patrick, you mentioned, Elias Pettersson and obviously, the Lotto line, gets a lot of the ink, right? And a lot of the attention, and deservedly so. It's a top line, and Brock Besser, leads the way. And, we're really familiar with him because he played, a couple hours down south of us here for UND. And I wanted to ask you though about Bo Horvat, because he's a guy to me that, might be because he centers that second line.
Yeah.
But, like even when the Canucks were losing, I watched Bo Horvat play, and I'm a big fan of his game and how he plays on both sides of the puck, right? Like he's not the biggest guy, but do you think he's been a little bit underappreciated in this North Division? Because I realize that, Vancouver has, struggled a little bit, and they've played more games than anybody else. And it's just until the last, 2 or 3 weeks that they've climbed back into the playoff race. But does he not get enough credit about, credit for, I should say, what he does for this team? Obviously he's the captain, but do you think that he's a guy that maybe is, I know it's a cliche, but is he underrated?
Well, I mean, he's got 8 points in this winning streak, so it's kind of, he's been showing up. But no, I get what you mean, because, he is the second line center. I mean, that's how it works, right? I think it was interesting. I had someone last season when they were putting together their awards ballot kind of come to me and said, "What do you think about Horvat for the Selke?" And I'm like, I'm not quite sure yet. He plays so many minutes, and it was one of those ones where it's like, how do you rate that award? And we like to think of sort of defensive forward, the guy who kills penalties and still scores, the Patrice Bergeron, being the archetype. But not everybody's going to be Patrice Bergeron. But Bo Horvat is not. I don't think he's Patrice Bergeron. Patrice Bergeron is going to go to the Hall of Fame. I don't think Bo Horvat's going to go to the Hall of Fame, but he's a hell of a player. And I think a lot of it it goes back, right to the beginning. I mean, he has in many ways his arc through his career has been exactly, I think, how you should treat a player and set expectations. A little bit to go back to what Craig was saying. Bo Horvat was, when he first came in the league, was the fourth line center, right? Like he just played soft minutes, and they're like, it's so weird also looking at how, Jim Benning's sort of management arc has gone. Because in the beginning they were just like, no, we're not rebuilding. We can reset this team. The Sedins were still relatively young. They liked the core. And of course that first season, they flopped in the playoffs, to be perfectly honest. They were actually pretty good in the regular season. Willie Desjardins got completely outcoached. But on that team, Bo Horvat was the number 4 guy. And it was a perfect role for him. And as his career has progressed, they've added and give him a little more and give him a little more. And along the way, he's worked on his skills. Like he's one of these guys. I mean, you always hear this about top end guys. Like he's one of these guys who works on everything all the time. He's really boring. All he does is work. And he's become this really fantastic skater. I mean, that was kind of the knock on him when he was coming out of junior, was that, maybe his feet would hold him back. And that's, I don't think anybody would say that anymore. You think about those goals he scored in the playoffs last summer. Yeah, he's a guy that I think he does fly under the radar a little bit on the conversation, I think it's because he's not this like dashing, flashing, creative player, It's because he is the hard worker, but he's still skilled. Like he's kind of in this sort of side corner. And like I said, you can understand why there is, what might be Selke conversation with him from time to time, because he, in many ways, is that Bergeron type. Like everything he does well. And, he's scored goals. He's got 13 goals this year. His hands are there. And it's been a weird, the funny thing about his season though, and I wrote about this a while ago, I think it was last week, and Tanner Pearson, who's been sort of nailed down to him since Pearson showed up 2 seasons ago as his left winger. Horvat doesn't have a single assist Tanner Pearson hasn't scored a ton this year, to be clear, and he's now out hurt, but Horvat doesn't have a single assist on a Pearson goal, which is just bizarre.
Yeah.
And Niels Höglander, who's played with him a fair bit, he does, he's helped set up some of his goals. And it's just a weird little fact. It's one of those ones where, like, forever the story was, who the heck are going to be his wingers? We don't know who to put with them. And now they have some wingers, but it doesn't really matter. He just keeps going. He is the Energizer Bunny in many, many ways of this team.
You're listening to the Illegal Curve Hockey Show Saturday morning. We're live on YouTube and all of our social media platforms talking about the Vancouver Canucks, the Jets into Vancouver on Monday and Wednesday night. Our guest from Post Media in Vancouver is Patrick Johnston.
Okay, well, Patrick, we pay attention to Jets Twitter and what's going on in the Jets world, and we know that every Canadian market has fun fan base. And I got to tell you though, I've been paying attention because the beauty of TweetDeck is it allows me to see what people are liking and some favoriting and stuff like that. And as a result, I do see what you guys in the Vancouver media are dealing with on a fairly regular basis. I think you know where I'm going with this, but the fan base seems divided, which is probably a nice way of putting it in terms of
vocal.
Vocal for sure. But in terms of what is this team? Is this a Vancouver team that folks need to accept that they're now, to your point, if they can maintain this, and it's going to be a high bar, continue to push forward and be a playoff team and let those guys get that playoff experience? Or should this be a team that sells and gets assets because their young core is still good enough, especially with a young goaltender in Thatcher Demko, to be good for many years to come?
Dave, first of all, the analogy behind your head is so perfect for Canucks Twitter.
Right. That's right.
Yeah. It's just, anyway, it is a never ending fire of various types. It is a great question. And I set out my stall a couple weeks ago when things looked really bad, when the chances of making the playoffs were like, if you go by Hockey Viz, 4%. I think they're now up to 13%, which, is a statement. Look how well they've played. And they've increased their chances, but they're still pretty bad. I'm really of the mindset that at the end of the day, what do you want to do? Are you here to sort of maybe play some playoff games and, okay. Or are you here to win the Stanley Cup? Are you here to strive for excellence, strive for greatness? And if you're doing that, the plan to date such as it is, has not been a good one. And there's been sort of this endless effort to kind of make half measures. Maybe things will work out. We'll sign Tyler Myers. Maybe that will fix the problem. We'll sign Jay Beagle and Antoine Roussel and Tim Shaw and all these. We'll fix our fourth line by spending a bunch of money on it. We'll sign Louis Eriksson because the Sedins need a winger and we don't like Alex Burrows. The sort of list goes on and on and on. And none of those things have worked. And in many ways, I don't like saying I told you so. But in many ways, I think those are such an example of how this ownership group management team never really been willing to commit to what needs to happen. And this goes back, this is almost like one of the founding stories of the Benning era, which is that Mike Gillis, who's the previous GM, goes to the ownership and says, we need to blow this up. We need to start building the next team. It's going to take 2 years. So we're going to trade everybody. We're going to get a bunch of picks. We'll fix drafting because Gillis was terrible. The Gillis era was terrible at drafting. This is a clear criticism of his time in charge. Ron DeLorme was in charge for 15 years or something like that. 3 general managers, and other than he had some decent hits in the first round, just atrocious outside the first round, except for 1 year. They need to fix drafting. They kind of did. Benning came in, he's, there's a bunch of reasons to that story, but under his watch, the Canucks drafted better. They actually are putting players in the lineup finally. that something in a way that they hadn't really done consistently in the past. And so they're sort of on the precipice. Like, this is a team that's sort of like, okay, you can see why they think the way they do, but at the end of the day, the approach they've taken in the past has not worked. And for that reason alone, I think it's a different way to go. You need to sit back and say, okay, what do we have? We have a few guys. I mean, trades are obviously going to be hard this year, and you're never going to be able to make as many moves as you can. But, even Pearson, he's out for 4 weeks, they say, at least. I think it's a high ankle sprain, but that's mostly just looking at the video, not having an actual assessment. So say he's back in 4 weeks. Well, that's only 1 week after the trade deadline. You could trade him at the deadline. He's going to have to sit out a week anyway. So you trade him to the U.S. Even the train to the U.S., he sits. I mean, that's the thing people don't quite get. Coming north, it's 2 weeks. Going south, it's only one. And in some cases, you can actually even get an exemption. So, if you think about it, there's a way to do that. So he's a guy that I think would draw interest from other teams. Brandon Sutter, I mean, my colleague Ben Kuzma suggested the Oilers would be interested, perhaps as a Kyle Turris replacement. Like, Brandon Sutter hasn't scored barely in 2 months, but he's still got, he'd be a handy fourth line center, So there's cases to be made of at least a couple of guys moving along. I think Jordy Ben might actually draw some interest. You need to set things up, because the other thing is this summer, like, forget this year. First of all, like, this is speaking to the ownership. Ownership is not going to make any money in the playoffs. Like, that's what they're here for. So why go with that and take advantage of the moment? Because if you can stockpile a few extra picks, you can turn to a team like Carolina and say, okay, you guys aren't going to be able to protect a couple interesting defensemen. Let's trade for one. We'll give you something so that you're not going to lose him in the expansion draft. You're actually going to get some others. There are other examples around the league of situations like that. And, leverage your position a little bit, because that is how you're going to get better. And then, if you do have some extra picks, you can draft well. They have they've got Vasily Podkolzin coming from the KHL, and he's going to be an interesting addition to the lineup, but he doesn't fix a lot of stuff. You're still going to have to deal with your third line. You still have to deal with your fourth line. Like, you still have guys on contracts next year that are just not efficient for your lineup, and your Pettersson and Hughes contracts are getting bigger. So you need to start thinking. You really do. I mean, we always joke thinking 40 chess, right? But you really do need to start thinking in these terms, that you can't sit back and go, well, I'll fill this hole, and I'll fill this hole, and I'll fill this hole. It just doesn't work that way. And the Dubois for Laine example, I think, is a great one, because there was two teams had a problem, and they made a swap, and it like made sense for both teams, and it lets them do other things now. And the Jets kind of got rid of their problem. Now it's the Jackets' problem, if you will. You know what I mean? Like, they've got Dubois, they figured it out. So, to learn from that. I mean, the Jets model is one that Trevor Linden pointed to, like how that 2018 team was built. How that progress happened. What Cheveldayoff was patient, and he also was like, I need to do this. Even he built a team that was going like this. And Trevor Linden said that, and basically led to his firing. So
it's quite the atmosphere there in Vancouver.
Always.
Patrick Johnston of Post Media is our guest on the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. We're live on YouTube and our social media platforms. This segment is brought to you by Rumors Restaurant and Comedy Club, officially declared the funniest place in Winnipeg by Illegal Curve Hockey. For over 30 years, Rumors has been bringing Winnipeg the best in stand-up comedy. To purchase tickets and for a list of performers and showtimes, visit rumorscomedyclub.com. Patrick, only a couple minutes left, and so we want to get to a couple more questions. You talk about the build of the Canucks. Is Jim Benning the right guy to see them through to whatever the next phase of that build looks like?
Well, it's been 7 years. I mean, if they make the playoffs, this is going to be, I think, a different conversation. It really comes down to that at this point, which in a weird way is ridiculous in how to make your process. But if they miss the playoffs, and this was sort of the case I was sort of making to this question, a couple weeks ago, which when it looked like it was completely over, and I think it still is, they will have made the playoffs twice in 7 years. This is a results-based business.
Yeah.
3-7 is not that great either. But I think if they do, it'll kind of validate ownership's position, which is, well, we got in. We made it last year 2 years in a row. And you're like, I guess. I mean, another analogy. I mean, I can't remember what year it is. Doug Wilson in San Jose. Remember he made all those trades and they still made the playoffs and they still went on a run because they just turned things over. Like sometimes that's the thing you need to do. I think if they do make the playoffs and they turn the corner, I think there's still a way to make the playoffs and make some moves. Like I think that's the other thing. But yeah, to answer the question, I just to date the sort of overall picture hasn't been good enough. There's been some decent drafting. There's no doubt about that. Free agents have been terrible, and most of the trades have been terrible. So
aside from that, things are going great.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, that to me, that's how you should make an assessment. At a certain point, the results matter. And to date, I would say there hasn't been enough. And so I would be surprised at this point in the offseason if Jim Benning remains the general manager. But I wouldn't be surprised if he stays either. That's such is life in Vancouver.
Patrick, just one last question for you here. I mean, Quinn Hughes is a player that obviously came really close to winning the Calder Trophy last year, and every time I watch him, I'm just so impressed. I imagine you are, and basically the entire hockey world is. And I won't even get into how did the Detroit Red Wings not take him at sixth overall? We're not gonna rub salt in the wound for Red Wings fans here, but I mean, you could argue that he could have gone as high as first overall, really. But I mean, is it easy to forget how young he is? Like you look at the points, and he's got the reverse Cy Young right now with 2 goals and 23 or 24 assists. But is it easy to forget that he's only 21 years old? Like for me, like this is a guy who could easily in a full 82 game season put up 70 to 80 points.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. He's young, and there's still there's still stuff for him to learn. He's every level of the game. Obviously, he's been a star, and now he's at the top. And this happens for most players as they start discovering, wow, everyone else is good. And so it's not an uncommon story. He's had he's been playing better lately. I'm sort of been paying attention in terms of his shots against when he's on the ice, and it's the last 15-20 games has generally been it's down. Like he started the year, we're pretty sure he had some sort of injury, and whatever that was, he's obviously recovered for. It's interesting how the kind of we'll put requests in for our media chats, and I don't think anybody's asked for him for a while, so I don't think we've talked to him for a while. But the last time I talked to him was a couple weeks ago, and he talked a bit about his health and basically admitted, I mean, he didn't say it, but in the way he phrased, it was clear that he'd been dealing with something. So, I think in general, he in a way he's been less of a story, which is good because the story earlier in the year was that he was having trouble. So yeah, you're totally right. He's a young guy. Like he's still, he's still on his way up. He's still got a year or two before he truly peaks in terms of at least his production. And yeah, so that's such a good thing. That is a thing where you can understand why the Canucks are sort of optimistic for a year or two from now. But you still need to build up. Then this goes back to what I was saying before, but you still need to build out the rest of the lineup. Like that's the lesson from the Oilers, right? Like you can do all you want with the cream, but if there's nothing underneath it, that's the problem. And now look where the Oilers. They finally have a coach who understands what he's doing, and a GM who's been able to make some decent bets and pull together a lineup and then obviously having an all-world, the best center, one of the best players ever play the game kind of changes the story. But anyway, yeah, Quinn Hughes. I mean, Quinn Hughes is, I think he's going to be a superstar for years to come. But yeah, you're right. He's 20.
I'm not even going to ask you, Patrick, about what you were doing at 20 because I don't want that.
Drinking too much beer.
That's right.
It's been 40 years since Drew was 20.
Hey, Ezzy, when you insult Patrick, you insult when you insult me, you insult Patrick, given how obviously we're doppelgangers for one another here.
I just turned 40 earlier this month, so it's all too real for me.
It's coming up for me in August, Patrick. So apparently we are exactly on the same wavelength, which is getting a little bit creepy. But
all right, boys.
Yeah,
you wish you were 38 years old like me, Drew.
Patrick, thank you, buddy.
Thanks, guys. Always a pleasure.
We'll talk
later,
again.
Patrick. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
There he goes, my doppelganger and our Vancouver Canucks expert, Patrick Johnston.
Somebody needs to come out with a meme here. Like that was incredible, and the fact that he was right below you.
I've already tweeted the picture.
And yes, and I just retweeted it saying it was the best looking left side of the screen in the history of our YouTube channel here.
Whoa! From the illegal curve account? I don't think so. That means Ezzy and I endorse your comment, and we most definitely do not.
You do endorse all of my comments. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll wrap up this morning's edition of the show. We have a post-game show coming up in about 12 hours time as well. So stay tuned. Quick commercial break, and then we'll be back with more of the Illegal Curve Hockey Show right after these messages.
Keeping Winnipeg laughing for over 30 years. Rumors, Canada's longest-running comedy club, bringing you the biggest laughs from the best comedians on the planet. Jerry Seinfeld, Chris Rock, Jon Stewart, Dennis Miller, Brad Garrett, the greats, and all the up-and-comers too. When was the last time you laughed out loud? Make it a great night out with friends, or book your office or birthday party. Even a fundraising event at Rumors. Get all the details and dates on upcoming shows at rumorscomedyclub.com.
Hey, Drew.
Ezzy, whoa, what a smile!
Yeah, I got my crowns done at Linden Market Dental Center, and they whiten my teeth.
I see.
They're so bright that every time I smile, they go,
"We have hockey tonight. Do you have a mouth guard to protect those pearly whites?"
"I sure do."
Whoa, they even ting through the mouth guard.
Linden Market Dental Center covers all your dental needs from restorative to cosmetic dentistry and will fit you with a sports guard for that active lifestyle. 877 Waverly. See lindenmarketdental.com.
Hi, it's Drew from Illegal Curve here. Selling your home can be stressful, but it wasn't for me. Thanks to my friends at Zappia Group Realty, they made the process so easy. My home sold within 48 hours and with multiple offers. Zappia Group Realty took care of everything with their exquisite customer service and attention to detail. If you want to sell your home for more in less time, get started by talking to Frank and Mauro Zappia of Zappia Group Realty. Online at zappiagroup.com.
While you can't always count on your team winning, nor your favorite player scoring, one thing you can always count on is Bernstein's Deli. They've expanded their services because the team at Bernstein's Deli wants to accommodate your needs and keep you safe. Open Tuesday to Saturday from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. to serve you. Head to your phone, in-store or online to shop for groceries or order meals from the restaurant, like the legendary Illegal Curve sandwich. Just go to bernsteinsdeli.com.
So you're a pizza person, you married a wing person, but somehow your kids are salad people. You can't pick your fam, but you can pick your BP meal deal, starting from $18.99 for takeout or delivery at bostonpizza.com.
Alrighty, final thoughts for this Saturday edition of the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. It's brought to you by Boston Pizza. Boston Pizza has the perfect starting lineup tonight with the BP Game Day Meal Deal. Choose two of your favorite medium gourmet pizzas like the Spicy Pierogi or the Mighty Meteor, along with a triple order of Boston's famous wings plus two dipping sauces, all for $54.99. It serves 5 to 6 people, or in my case, one person. Available for takeout and delivery only at bostonpizza.com or download the My BP app. Final thoughts from you, General, on the Jets, of course, in Edmonton. It's going to start in about, about 10 or so hours from now, 9.5 hours from now until puck drop then, and then, of course, the post-game show afterwards. Final thoughts on what you're looking for tonight, Dave and Ezzy.
Well, obviously, we're going to talk about your doppelganger, Patrick Johnston, going with the Stone Cold Steve Austin look, Drew. So my thoughts are, I just didn't realize there was a member of the hockey media that looked that much like you.
There's nobody that looks like you, though. I can assure you of that. There is absolutely nobody in the hockey media who looks like you, my good friend.
Yeah, and that's definitely a good thing. But no, I mean it should be a much better hockey game tonight, boys, in Edmonton. The game the other night was just not a crispy game. It wasn't a silky game, as Paul Maurice said. So we're expecting a lot more goals, certainly, and just a much sharper game from each side. But looking at it at more of a macro level, it's just going to be really interesting to see what happens on this road trip. By far, the toughest road trip when you consider it's right in the middle of 17 games in 31 days. So it's going to be interesting to see, if we see a Ville Heinola come into the lineup or maybe a Jansen Harkins come into the lineup. But, this stretch here over the next week or so is going to have a huge impact on the standings. Can the Calgary Flames maintain pace with the rest of the division? Can the Vancouver Canucks, continue their winning ways? Obviously, the Jets are hoping that they're able to end those winning ways, but just overall looking to see how the Jets have bounced back from a bit of a rough stretch. We talked about it earlier, right? The Jets have lost 3 of their last 5 games. And yes, one of those was in overtime, but, this has been, a little bit of a difficult stretch, which is to be expected based on, the condensed schedule. But just overall looking forward to much sharper efforts from the Jets here coming up in Edmonton and then continuing through the road trip.
Dave Minuk, final thought.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're going to know in about an hour when Jets morning skate in quotes here in Manitoba gets going in Edmonton. So we'll see. We'll have some sort of indication, maybe not necessarily there because, of course, there's no Jets media currently covering the team that's traveling. So we won't necessarily get that insight right at 11:30 in Edmonton, 12:30 here in Winnipeg. But the fact of the matter is that once Paul Maurice speaks, we'll find out. And so you can come to illegalcurve.com, get the pregame report. We'll have the players and Paul Maurice's comments featured there. To Ezzy's point, I mean, I think it's just a function of can we see this Jets team do what they've done all season long, which is bounce back from a loss and have a better effort. We saw it against the Leafs. I actually anticipate that the Jets will. I mean, maybe I'll be eating crow to your point, Drew, in about 12 hours. When
crow doesn't taste very good. I've tried it before. I wouldn't advise on that.
Is crow kosher?
Not that I'm aware of, but that's why I don't. That's why I don't plan on eating it. If you know what I'm saying.
Fair enough. Touché.
So the point is that I mean, again, I would anticipate that this team is prepared to do what they've done all season long. I mean, again, that's what you've come to expect. That's been the standard. Connor Hellebuck, we know, is in net after having a game off, so he'll be ready to go and he'll be sharp. And again, to me, it's a function of can this team do what it's done all season long, right? That's what they've been consistent at, is being able to bounce back. So we'll see what they are able to do, but I would anticipate. I mean, A, I don't anticipate any lineup changes, and B, I would anticipate a bounce back effort from this Winnipeg Jets team, which again, it wasn't like it was an atrocious effort on Thursday. I thought the whole Thursday was a one-off because of both Edmonton and Winnipeg's perspective. So I think both teams are going to want to play better, and I just think it's incumbent on the Jets knowing, and again, I think it's a function of knowing what you've got coming behind you. Vancouver is charging hard. Calgary is playing well in front of their new coach. You've got Montreal that's 3 points back of you. You've created a cushion. It's not insurmountable, and that's, I think, probably a good thing. They can feel it. They can feel these teams breathing down their backs. And again, it's all about creating some space and adding points to that standing banks. So that's why it's so important for the Jets not to hold their sticks tightly and play it as if the game is got everything on the line. But just knowing that you can't afford to lose ground and that these are all 4-point games.
And on that note, we want to thank all of our guests for joining us on the program today. Of course, in hour number 1, Sarah Orlesky, Craig Button, and then Patrick Johnston of Post Media. In case you missed any of the show, be sure to hit that subscribe button on our YouTube channel. Smash that subscribe button. Smash that like button right now, folks.
Smash it like Smash Mouth.
Even if you're listening to the podcast, go on YouTube.
There you go.
Hit like, hit subscribe,
and then smash it.
And no, don't smash it because we don't want people to smash their computers.
And then, of course, if you're watching on YouTube, go subscribe to the podcast. It's a constant rotation of things you need to be subscribing to. And of course, a reminder: the post-game show, when tonight's contest ends, we're estimating right around probably 11:30, 11:45 or so p.m. tonight.
Nice
Dave
and early.
and I, Ezra Ginsburg's already tapped out. He said he's too old and he's too tired to do the post-game show tonight. So Dave and I will be joining you for a late night edition of the post-game show.
Will not be a long one
next week. I'm taking one night off. I'm an old man with 2 kids. Like, I got to take the night off. Drew, you can't relate to that.
I'm an older man with 2 kids as well, and I'm going to be here. So you're just a lazy man. That's all that is. But that's okay. We let you go. We understand that the artist, the brilliant mind that is the mind.
He needs a reset.
Yeah, that's right. He needs a reset. Anyway,
I don't know about brilliant, but it's something.
It's a mind.
It's a beautiful mind.
It's a mind. It's for sure a mind.
It is
definitely a mind.
That's right. We want to give a big shout out and a big thank you to all of our sponsors: Rumors Restaurant and Comedy Club, Linden Market Dental Center, Bernstein's Deli, Zappia Group Realty, and Boston Pizza. Support these fine local businesses because they support Illegal Curve Hockey and they make this program a reality. For Ezra Ginsburg, for Dave Minuk, I'm your host, Drew Mindell. This has been the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. We'll see you in about 12 hours or so for the post-game show. Thanks for watching, everybody.